So, Madam Clerk, are we ready to proceed? You've got your recorder ready to go?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And since we're all here and ready to go, I will call the Monday, January 26, 2015 Town of Commissioners. And begin with Thank you. Commissioner Farrell, would you lead us in the pledge, sir?
Would everyone rise for pledge? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First order of business is consent agenda. We only have one item there tonight, which is the minutes from January 12th. Any changes or modifications to the consent agenda? If not, do I hear a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Foley.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Fiocco. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed. The consent agenda is passed. And now we need to approve the regular agenda. Is anybody aware of any changes, additions, deletions to the regular agenda? If so, do I hear a motion to approve this agenda as written?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Being not opposed, we approve the regular agenda. The clerk has given me a sign-up sheet that shows we have nobody signed up for public expression under Citizen Matters. So that brings us straight to our first order of business, which is the public hearing for the annexation request from Pittsboro Ford. I guess we need a motion to go into public hearing.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Unopposed. Then we are in public hearing on item number 1, annexation request from Pittsboro Ford. That's what Mr. Bass is going to introduce this.
Yes, sir. This is voluntary annexation request, case A, 2015-01. Applicants Foyette Nelson LLC, or commonly referred to as Pittsboro Ford. Property is located at 1293 Thompson Street. Current zoning is C2, no change proposed. It's 1.351 acres. It's immediately adjacent to the existing corporate limits. Currently is a vacant residential house, and at some point there will be some expansion there to the dealership. The property is served by public utilities, water and wastewater, and the public hearing is required by General Statute 168-31 to consider this request. And again, the matter is will change the municipal boundary to incorporate this parcel into the city limits.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Bass?
I do have one question. That I received a letter from someone, and they were asking about the annexation request, and that the owner is Howard Townsend. However, the applicant is Foyette Nelson.
Yes,
They want to know how that was.
Since I had written this, I learned that the transfer of property took place. So originally, when it came up in front of the board, it was Howard Townsend was the one that transfer set place, and now it's the LLC, the way it is.
So that was transferred, do you recall the date?
I do not know.
December 31st.
Thank you.
Ms. Bass, you say the property is served by water and sewer. Is that and the fact that it was a vacant residence, does that mean that there's a water meter for the property and there is a sewer connection, or is it just that there is water and sewer in the roadway in front?
It's available in front.
So it's not presently being served, but it has access.
Right.
Okay.
It currently has water
Has a water meter?
at an out-of-town rate, yes.
Got it. And it has a septic field, I take it?
Sewer. It wasn't in town, so it's not in sewer.
Okay, the sign-up sheet has no citizens interested in testifying or speaking in a public hearing. We can allow the applicant an opportunity if he chooses, or he may decline if he just wants to.
Unless you have any questions,
Anybody have any questions for the applicant? Okay, if the board's questions have been answered and there are no one present requesting to be heard in the public hearing, do I hear a motion to go out of public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And we are out of public hearing on the matter of Pittsburgh Ford. First item of old business is request from Pittsburgh Place Partners, LLC, for extension of water and wastewater capacity allocation and extension of their MUPD zoning approval.
I can take this, Mayor, I can set up the issue, and then we also have with us this evening Mr. Jackson from Pittsburgh Place and Mr. Stiers, legal counsel for Pittsburgh Place. Some of you are more aware of the history than I am, and some maybe not so much. But the applicant this evening, he's not officially an applicant, I guess, but Pittsburgh Place could probably provide a little bit of history as well. But essentially what we're dealing with is a property that was approved for mixed-use plan development back in 2007. During that time, or previous to that time, Pittsburgh Place had acquired a water and wastewater allocation of 15,000 gallons per day. In the time since the approval of the zoning and the allocation of the water, for various reasons, the project has not developed. You'll recall back in November, I presented a memo which discussed a little bit of the history of the project, as well as some possible options, and a bit of history as well. But in that time since, the Pittsburgh Place Partners has come forward with a slightly revised request from the previous one, which was asking the town to consider a 5-year extension of the 15,000 gallons per day, as well as a life extension of the zoning classification for the property. We discussed a couple of things, but then agreed probably that I think for a number of reasons, given the length of other things on the agenda that night, as well as possibly going back to the developer for other ideas and further discussion, and also to allow them to present the issue tonight. I guess calling them forward and seeing if they have any input and description of what it is they're proposing this evening. But in your packet, I've also included, in addition to my cover memo, there's a letter and some correspondence from Pittsburgh Place that outlines the MUPD water and sewer extension request. There's also a letter from Income Properties, which talks about potential development on site. Pittsburgh Place also gives a rundown of past history, and then the developer has also suggested some language to amend section 5.6.10 of the Pittsburgh zoning ordinance, which they're suggesting could allow the town to extend the zoning. In a nutshell, as you're aware, the issue with wastewater and wastewater capacity in Pittsburgh is such that obviously there isn't a heck of a lot to spare. And so we have to consider any extensions judiciously. But even within that framework, there are certain things that we're somewhat restricted to. That being our own policy in terms of extending the water and wastewater, but also our own ordinance as far as actually extending the zoning. So we're really looking at it at two different tracks, and that's why I've given, I guess if you look at the second page of my memo, given two different lists of options as far as what we might begin to consider. Before I get into those and discuss those a little bit more, I think maybe at this point in time it would be possible to have the applicant give a little bit of background and history and how we got here.
Thank you, Bob. If I may.
Mr. Grace Myers.
Hey. Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, Board of Commissioners, my name is Grace Stiers. I'm here on behalf of Pittsburgh Place Partners that has made the request. I was the one who wrote the request to you. You really do have two requests before you. One is a fairly simple, straightforward one, which I'll address first, and that's the request for the extension of the MUPD zoning classification, which you can do for 1 year as of right under your current ordinance, and there's no issue about that, for call shown. The second request, the second letter I wrote to Mr. Grusbeck and Mr. Messick, had to do with the water and wastewater allocation. And both those two requests, initially, when I wrote to them, asked for 5 years, 5-year extension for the water and wastewater, and a 5-year extension on the zoning. Obviously, the last several years have been extraordinarily difficult for developers to find tenants for retail development, mixed-use development, such as what was approved back in 2007. This project was for 72 acres, and for those who maybe weren't here, there was a lot of time and effort that went into developing a very detailed MUPD plan. And Ms. Baldwin, I think, was here during that time, and you may remember all the details that went into putting together a plan that went over and above what your normal ordinance requirements were. And it included things such as a phasing plan, the different uses, what would be retail, what would be grocery store, hotel, entertainment center, over the years, how they would be built out over phases, the landscaping that would be used out there for that plan, the monumentation, and the signage and so forth. All that went into the application, which the town and this Board of Commissioners spent a lot of time going through this before finally approving. But under your current ordinance, this would, if not extended, would all be for naught. It would all disappear, and the property would revert back to the underlying zoning, which would be manufacturing 2, the M2 zoning classification. Now, when you adopted your new comprehensive land use plan in 2012, you recognized that this part of the town and its ETJ was appropriate for mixed use. So in your comprehensive land use plan, you noted that this was a mixed use area. So allowing it to revert back to M2 would in fact take the property that is currently in conformity with your land use plan and make it non-conforming with your land use plan. And also, that plan is in place now, so Mr. Jackson markets this to potential tenants and purchasers, whether it be for a grocery store, drugstore, retail, clothing store. They know what the standards would be. They know that what the landscaping standards would be, what the signage standards would be, what the road standards would be, that were all set forth in here and approved. if this plan disappears, if it expires, then not only is there no certainty or security or knowledge of what the plan is for this 72 acres, but if you're looking around this property and you're thinking about how I want to develop it and how does it fit, then you don't know what this plan and what this property is going to how it's going to be developed. And reverting back to M2, then you have, which is probably the most lenient zoning classification you have in town, then you have permitted uses under the M2, such as electric and electronic machine manufacturing, foundry casting, machine shop, manufacture and assembly of electric signs, neon signs, and billboard, poultry dressing plants, poultry egg processing. And these become uses by right. And I think we can all recognize that a plan for a mixed-use shopping, office, live, work, play, mixed-use development would be preferable than just going back to the by right M2 that's in your zoning ordinance. So your ordinance currently allows for an extension in these circumstances for 1 year. So you currently have that right now, and we would appreciate that if that's the decision that you were to decide. But I want to be realistic. We are still coming out of the Great Recession. We have prospects. We have the letter from Income Properties that's in the packet attached to Mr. Grusbeck's memo, which states from this, he serves kind of as a broker and agent for certain national retailers. I'm pleased to let you know that I am representing 3 serious grocery store anchors seeking to take a look at the Pittsburgh market. It appears to me that your site immediately behind the State Employees Credit Union will represent a very good opportunity for them. Your site is very well located with respect to the existing demographics in the town of Pittsburgh. And even if we couldn't get a commitment in 12 months, that we should certainly be very surprised if we could not deny a commitment from one of these anchors within the next 36 months or 3 years. Mr. Jackson has been very active and diligent in marketing the property, and we're just starting to see the uptick and the of interest by national retailers that are now looking to move forward on plans that they've had on hold for 3, 4, 5 years, just as Mr. Jackson's been on hold waiting for this market to turn. In discussion with Mr. Grusbeck and Mr. Messick, though, the ordinance clearly states you have the ability to extend 1 year, and it's silent as to whether you could extend it for more than that. And so, in discussions with Mr. Grusbeck, and we very much appreciate him meeting with us in person and talking with us since the November meeting, Mr. Jackson said if we could have 3 years, I really think that we could get this off the ground and moving. And to ensure that there's not a legal battle, we lawyers, we get involved in legal battles and we don't want those to occur, that let's just go ahead and propose a text amendment which would state that this could be extended, explicitly extended, for up to 3 years. And let's qualify it in a way that only projects that have been held up during the last several years in the recession could have this 3-year extension, because as Mr. Grusbeck and I talked about, we did not want to necessarily, now it's pretty much 1 year for a good cause shown. Instead of making it 3 years for any and all projects going forward, we just have for projects that fit this category to have the zoning extended for 3 years. Happy to talk about the water and wastewater, but let me stop at this point and see if you have any questions about the zoning, the mixed-use zoning that's there, your right to extend it for 1 year, and our request that the ordinance be changed so that you could extend it explicitly for 3 years, and then I'll talk a little bit about the water and the wastewater.
Yeah, I have a question, I guess, more for the staff, and I'm sure Mr. Stiers knows the answer too, but does our ordinance say that we can extend it in 1 year increments, or just for 1 additional year, after which it reverts? So it's a one-time opportunity, and if at the end of that year, there's no second opportunity to extend it for additional 1 year increments. Okay. That's what I thought I read. I was making sure.
Yeah, then entire relevant section of the ordinance is actually quoted in full. If you look on the second memo that I wrote, the second page of the second memo.
Yeah. I remember reading that, and I thought that's what I understood to say. So I guess the follow-up question would be, if the board elected to take that option, where does that put the developer at the end of that year, now that they have to resubmit a full MUPD zoning package? If they want to continue to pursue it, would that be their next course of, would that be their next recourse? Would it be just to resubmit the same plan? Or?
They're suggesting that there be a text amendment to that section of the ordinance that would allow an additional 2 years in some specific circumstance in which they would fit.
Yeah, I understand that. But if the board decided not to do that and just extend it for a year, at the end of that year, they could resubmit the same plan, pay a fee, we go through public hearing, and which would be, nobody wants to do all that, I'm sure. But I'm just trying to make sure I understand all the options.
Yeah, they could submit that plan or some other plan.
Or some modified version thereof. So.
That's why we talked about 5 years additionally.
Yeah.
But, Mr. Jackson's confident enough that given the current market conditions that 3 years he should be able to meet all, because once you get started with the MUPD, then the MUPD stays in place. And we think we can get started in the next 3 years.
And by getting started, that requires 2 items, and that is approval of site plan or a subdivision plan and construction of required improvements. What are the required improvements? Are those the public improvements? So the water and sewer lines, the roads, all of that has to be constructed and diligently pursued to completion.
That's all, and that's why this is a very long, detailed plan, but that's exactly right. I spelled out in great detail as to what those plans were, which included the extension of water and sewer lines to serve this area. I mean, if this is allowed to go forward, this is a considerable undertaking, which is why we don't want to pull the trigger too soon. And we haven't, because starting does require a considerable capital investment by Mr. Jackson and or the purchasers of the property. That's exactly right.
So the MUPD is valid as long as the triggering device mechanism is the start, not the completion.
That's correct.
Right.
If you'd like to, I'd be happy to talk about the water and wastewater. When Mr. Jackson and his investors purchased this property in 2005, they recognized that in order to make the investment to purchase the property, make the investment to develop these plans, that it all be nice, but wouldn't be worth the paper they were written on unless they had the water and wastewater allocation. So they went to Dixie Restaurant Supply and they purchased 15,000 gallons per day. And this is money that was invested and it was actually purchased in an agreement between Dixie Restaurant Equipment Company, there we go, and the town and Pittsburgh Place Partners, with a 3-way agreement signed by all 3 parties to purchase that in 2005. In 2008, that allocation was going to expire. The MUPD was in place, so I came back and I stood here and made a presentation to the commissioners at that time and said, we need to link the water and sewer allocation to the zoning, so that going forward, as long as the zoning was in place, the water and sewer allocation was in place. Even though there's 2 different issues, we modified the agreement so that developed, and your question, Michael, was right on point, that what triggered the MUPD also triggered the water and wastewater allocation, and that the dates were tied together. And in 2008, this Board of Commissioners approved a extension to the water and wastewater allocation so that it would run concurrently with the zoning. And that amendment was signed by the town and by Pittsburgh Place Partners. So even though it's two separate requests, they both would expire at the same time, absent this board extending that allocation. I won't reread what the letter from Mr. Hicks on income properties, but for tenants to start moving into this area, there needs to be the water and wastewater allocation that Mr. Jackson and his partners and investors purchased in 2005. So in requesting the extension for the MUPD, we've also requested an extension of the water and wastewater allocation. And initially, we asked for that extension to be for 5 years, just as we asked for the extension of the MUPD classification. But again, after conversation with Mr. Grusbeck, and he very clearly indicated to us that it is a finite resource, it is something that the stewardship of which the town takes very seriously. I went back to Mr. Jackson and said, okay, let's modify our request and think about, what is it that, we really, that we're looking like we're going to need to move forward. And when we modified that request by letter in December, then we have $15,000 right now. If you'll let us keep that for 1 more year, we feel comfortable, again, that we'll be able to use at least $5,000 of that, but, let us have that $15,000 to continue our marketing efforts, our contacts with brokers for grocery stores, drugstores, clothing stores, national restaurant chains, etc., for 1 more year. And then at the end of that 1 year, we'll relinquish $5,000, but let us keep the remaining $10,000 for 2 more years, so that we'll have at least, we'll have the $15,000. We'll see if we can use $5,000 this coming year with the first tenants. Then we'll have the $10,000 remaining for 3 years. If we cannot use it and don't use it in 3 years, it's gone. But at least let Pittsburgh Place have a shot over the next 3 years to bring in the types of tenants that will be attracted by this plan and that would need the water and sewer, so that when we respond to Mr. Hicks or his clients contact us, and sometimes they're anonymous, and he says, give us a profile of what you have to offer for this property. We're able to say, we have zoning in place, here are the plans, here is your required landscaping, here's your required signage, here's your required transportation, here's your required public improvements, and we have, and then the next question is, do you have water and sewer? And the answer is yes. So the two, we feel like that even though there are 2 separate requests, and we'll ask you to vote on them separately tonight, we also feel like giving us the permission to continue the $15,000 just as the commissioners did in 2008 with a 1-year extension, and see if we can use at least $5,000, but then the remaining $10,000 for 2 more years should give us the flexibility and the packet of offerings that we can make to the retailers that would be looking at this project. So that's how we've modified our request in light of what we had our conversation with Mr. Grusbeck. Again, I appreciate him talking with us. I appreciate Mr. Messick working with us. We feel like this is a compromise, not necessarily what we had initially requested, but would allow us to continue to stay in the game, so to speak, for a project that we think has a lot to offer to Pittsburgh and would create jobs, increase tax base, and be complementary to your downtown area. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
I guess I had one maybe for Mr. Grusbeck on the water and wastewater capacity. If we extend the 15,000 gallons per day to the 3 years, what is our prepayment on the capital recovery fee? What is that payment on that? What is their portion?
Well, the policy allows for us to collective prepayment of the capital recovery fee. And I think that would depend on how we're interpreting the uses that were proposed in that site. And I think I outlined it in the November 24th memo. It simply allows for that. It doesn't necessarily stipulate that take place. Now, the applicant did, the developer did indicate that there was some consideration that was paid for that some time ago when it was originally purchased, so that would probably have to factor in as well. So that was, I highlight that because I highlight the possibility of the capital recovery fee because obviously, as Mr. Steyer said, they originally came in with a request for 5 years, and given that a number of years has passed for whatever reason without any development on site, to me, another 5 years of 15,000 gallons per day, given other things that we could possibly be having here in the future, seems like a little bit much to reserve. And so the ordinance or our policy does allow us to consider some prepayment for capital recovery fees. And again, I can't give you an exact dollar figure for what we would charge on that, but there are some applications that we could make based on the plan that was submitted. That was a consideration that seemed a little bit more palatable to me if we were talking about a 3-year extension. Now, granted, we can do a 1-year extension right out of the box as such, and that's up to your discretion. And of course, the other option would be that we allow it to expire, or alternatively, as Mr. Steyer has indicated on the second page of my personnel, and as you can see up there, we could go with sort of a graduated plan where we would extend the period, we would extend the 15,000 for 1 year. In essence, that 5,000 gallons per day would kind of be a stick within that first year, where if they didn't use it, it gets reduced to 10,000 in years 2 and 3, or in the 13th month of it. So, if the option of the capital recovery fees is something that you were willing to consider, then we would want to, before I answer that question with the dollars and cents answer, we would probably want to do a little bit more research as to the plan itself and what they would be proposing to develop within a short amount of time before we get into a negotiation of prepayment. Does that make sense?
Yes, even though I look at it like this, even as though if we go for 1 year on this water and wastewater capacity, I feel like that we still should have some kind of capital recovery fee. Because if you sit at home and don't even run your water out of your home, you got a base rate. That's just my thought.
I'd like to ask Mr. Messick a related question. Once we collect the capital recovery fee, does that create a property right to do they now own that capacity and it no longer is subject to expiration? That's a lot of money to take from somebody.
We never did settle on money, did we?
No, but if we were to take a capital recovery fee from them, does that change the relationship between
The capital recovery fees, well, you're mixing up 2 or 3 different things. This was a contractual arrangement that was made with Mr. Blair originally,
Yes.
and it was originally couched upon the terms of either you use it or you lose it, and had a definite time period. And of course, all that has been extended on and on and on and on for many years now. So, but in the normal context, the capital recovery fee is paid when you approve a plat, a subdivision plan, or a site plan. And I wouldn't say it's an entitlement, but they pay for capacity. They still got to use it, and there's a time frame for all that.
Okay, well, I have the sense, and again, I might, maybe because I don't understand the law, but I have the sense that collecting the capital recovery fee before they're ready to use it sort of locks us into keeping that. And the other thing is, my other concern is, we're in the process now of working with the university to sort out our water and sewer rates, and I don't think they're working on our capital recovery fees, but perhaps our finance department and utilities department should be. I don't know that the capital recovery fees that we're charging today are fair market value for what we're selling it, and they might, and like Joel, that he need to be raised, and perhaps raised substantially. So I hate to collect those fees prematurely and grossly undercharge what the fair market value is for that capacity. So those are some questions that need to be sorted out before we get to the decision.
There's a middle ground too. I mean, you already have an ordinance that allows you to, in effect, sell capacity for somebody who pays in advance, and the fees are used as an offset to the fees that come due when the actual development occurs. That would be more comparable in terms of, since they haven't got any plans to do anything immediately, that would be an option that would be more practical, I think.
And one that kind of fits into the reality that we're dealing in the market. Again, having purchased what some could refer to as a reservation fee in essence. We are hopeful, but there are no guarantees from the development. But at such time, I understand, Mr. Farrell, what you're saying about paying the capital recovery fee, but at such time as that amount was used, again, I don't have authorization to speak on behalf of my client, but it seems to me to make sense that if we could maintain the status quo, that they have purchased by contract these rights that will expire if they're not used, but at such time as that they are used, that they pay the capital recovery fee for that use. I mean, I think that would fit well, I think, within the structure of what we're able to do and what kind of what the expectation of the market would be out there. But we would ask that it'd be a fairly simple extension of the current contract, such as in 2008, but with some type of term that Mr. Messick and I could draft up that said, upon the utilization, there would be a fee that would be whatever was in place at that time. If it went up, it went up. If it went down, it went down. But that would be, at least we knew that when we were marketing the property to potential tenants and restaurants and grocery stores and drugstores, we knew that we could represent them, that we had the rights. And we could tell them, okay, and it would cost this amount to actually deliver it to your doorstep.
I am not completely familiar with the project. You mentioned 72 acres, mixed-use development. That's a pretty substantial undertaking. Does the 15,000 gallons per day build out 72 acres of mixed-use development?
Not even close.
Okay.
No.
So, at some point in the future, to execute the plan, you would require an additional allocation.
That's absolutely correct.
Do you have an estimate on percentage of development proposed that the 15,000 gallons would cover?
I tell folks I'm just a dumb lawyer. I actually don't. I don't have it, but maybe Mr. Jackson could respond to that.
So would you like me to speak to that?
Oh, please, sir.
Thanks. I'm Bill Jackson. So the tricky part of that is that as you know, the amount of water and sewer needed for large retail anchors is very small compared to the amount of water and sewer needed for restaurants, for example, on the front. And so it really varies a great deal depending on how much the ultimate mix of all that ends up being. And although we got approval for substantial residential uses as well as other uses, that is a fairly intense use of water and sewer capacity. And so we would probably not do much residential use unless the water and sewer capacity was available at that time in substantial quantity. So if you wanted a guess, I would say that maybe 20 or 25% of that first of the approved MUPD, which is
South of the road.
Yeah,
East of just this section here. You with me? Maybe 20 to 25%.
but that would vary a great deal depending on how many, essentially you could build a 50,000-foot grocery store that may use less capacity than one restaurant that's sitting on the front. So it really varies a lot depending on exactly what you build. And so, and what it appears is that there's clearly interest at this point in a food store in this part of the world. So that's the most likely. That's a fairly unintense use of water and sewer capacity. And then we think the most likely thing to happen after that is one or two restaurants on outparcels on the front. So that's our best guess of what is likely to happen. And it's very hard to predict how fast that would happen. But we do have current interest, and we would hope we would get some answer from some of those people within 12 months. So I hope that helps.
What do you anticipate as the build out for this property? How many years?
Yeah, so longer than we thought originally when we decided to yeah, it could easily be 10 years.
Yeah.
10 years or
So
more.
it's not like you'd be asking for water and sewer instantly, would be over a 10-year period.
No.
Yeah, that's correct.
And in fact, at one point, we had, as we build out and the project gets momentum and starts accelerating, we have had discussions, and I think Mr. Terry had said on some of those, about how we could, or our tenants could partner with the town and others that have substantial property ownership interest in the area to try to find a common win-win for expanding generally the water and sewer capabilities for the entire area. That we would see ourselves as being a part of that process in some fashion.
And there's just one other point that I would make, if I may, relating to all of this. And part of the early history of this is shortly after we got the approval for this project, we were approached by Walmart, who said, we really would like to go on that site. And it fit within the approval parameters that we had. And, seeking to be in a cooperative relationship with the town, we approached the town council at that point, and they hated the idea of a Walmart being in that town. And we turned Walmart down. And we could have easily used substantial water and sewer capacity, and we would have much improved our financial circumstance. And unfortunately, if we'd known we were going to be facing the greatest recession since the Great Recession, I don't know whether we or the board, either one, would have made the same decision. But we operated, in my mind, the very utmost spirit of cooperation with the town to not do something that we had the legal ability to do. And I've been coming to these town meetings for a long time, although not much recently. But this board has a long history of being cooperative with developers who have proceeded and spent their money in good faith. And all I would suggest to you is that from a practical standpoint, it's just not possible to anticipate the type of recession that we had. We've marketed this property well, we've proceeded well, and we will continue to do that as we recover from the recession. But we just think it would really be unfair under all those circumstances to say, well, oh golly, gee, we've got some other uses for the water and sewer capacity in spite of the fact that you bought it, in spite of the fact we've had this recession. We think it's okay for that not to be extended. So that's our position. Thank you so much.
Happy to answer any other questions that you have. So basically, we're just asking that the status quo where we are right now be maintained, and for 3 years, with the diminishing rights of water capacity after 1 year, from 15 to 10.
Any questions for Mr. Stiers?
No, I've got a couple of technical things that I just want to make sure I get out of the way. Part of the memorandum from Mr. Brusbeck talks about a letter dated August 29, 2014, but then mentions actually sent on 12/23/2014. And the ordinance requires that a request be received 30 days prior. I just want to confirm that, in fact, that mention of 12/23 is not the date at which we consider having received the request.
We would consider, that's a great question, and as I mentioned back on the 24th, we would consider the original request, which was back in August, to be the date of the actual request. This was just simply a refinement of requesting it.
I did not have my automatic date set on my Microsoft Word to update to it, but it was an amendment after we met, and
I
Mr.
think it
Rizzo
was the
said.
29th was the letter.
Yeah, August 29th, and then the
Yep.
subsequent letter and offer was actually in December 23rd.
Yeah.
But I think your question is still valid, whether...
Whether we can actually do this or not.
Yeah,
But Mr. Messick and I talked, we actually, we were prepared to come here back in September if we had to. And Mr. Messick and I discussed and agreed that, you know, as we were continuing discussions with Mr. Grusbeck and staff, that the August 29th letter would secure our rights so the board could do this.
And then the other thing that, this is a question for Mr. Messick. By ordinance, we have the ability to grant a 1 year. Without this amendment, we would not have the ability to grant more than 1 year. Is that correct, this text amendment to the ordinance?
Yes, sir.
So if we were to actually have that authority, we would have to go through the process of amending our ordinance,
Yes.
which would be a public hearing
Yes.
and all that. So
Right.
to take action on the 3-year request, we don't even have the authority to do that right now.
no, and I think that, again, we're just looking for you to discuss
Got
and
it.
consider some options, then provide direction for us. I don't know that we're going to solve the world's problems tonight.
I just want to make sure I understand the process.
Yeah.
You probably do need to at least extend it 1 year, because if you didn't, then I'm not so sure the August 29th letter, I mean, but it's like if you extend it 1 year, that gives us time to work out some of the other issues. And you could certainly do that under your ordinance while we approve that tonight, and then the 3 years could be a process that could run its course.
I guess given the fact that the letter was received on time, there's kind of an automatic extension until it's decided it's no longer extended. But of course, you're in no man's land and don't know how to make an investment and do anything.
That's, if Mr. Jackson had received an offer today, we'd say, we don't know.
Right.
So I mean, our preference would be for you to go ahead and at least grant the 1 year extension, and then schedule the text amendment for public hearing for adoption, and give us some indication as to the board's receptivity to that would be appreciated as well. So again, potential purchasers, potential tenants don't like uncertainty. So we're trying to have as much information so we can effectively market the property as possible.
And if I could too, just advise the board that, 15,000 gallons per day with the limited capacity that we have is a considerable amount of capacity. So we're, in all due respect, the developers are not the only people in no man's land, so to speak, with us. So from that standpoint, that's why I think it's important to consider our options and to be, very careful when we discuss, extending this. And it has a value. That 15,000 gallons per day has a definite value that far exceeds what the developer originally paid for it, especially if they were to develop today. And so I think we need to keep that we need to take that into account as well. So,
Yeah, by my reckoning, that's about 42 houses.
I'm sorry?
That capacity would accommodate about 42 dwelling units if they were in residential. 3-bedroom size.
One advantage of this project is that it's already got so many things in place and it's ready to move forward as soon as they get tenants. And so I think that's significant. Seems like a lot of work has gone into this. It is unfortunate that there was a recession. I think Powell Place was impacted by that as well. But it seems like they're in a good position, and I understand if we want this project to succeed, that unless they have something concrete, it's going to be very difficult for them to find tenants for the space.
I have a question. Go ahead. So in the event that we did give them the year, that's effective starting when we vote for a year, right?
It would be a year from the time the other one expired.
Oh, so
October 8th.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's
So it's
time is
really not
running
a
right
year.
now.
It's,
Not really.
It would end up being 9 months or something, but then we
A year is
execute
not
it.
very much time, so if in that
Yeah.
year and they aren't able to get started, then they would lose very much time, really.
I have a question, Mr. Masick. So basically, if we were to extend this for 1 year, then essentially, and then say, just to give them time to, sort some things out, then would that count towards the 3 years if we go back and say,
Yes.
yes, we want to do it
Yes.
for 3 years?
So
basically, we would extend it.
If you
1 year
subsequently
and-
amended the ordinance to allow for an additional 2 years, and then you saw fit to grant that additional time to them, then yes, they would have a maximum of 3 years.
A maximum of 3 years.
I would agree with that.
Since we've already granted quite a few years, that's 7 years, I think that has been extended from the initial time that it was actually approved. So basically, I don't know what the board will decide in reference to doing that. I don't know. But I know at the time that it was approved, it was our understanding, and I was on the board at that time, that there were some people that were in line to start building. So I don't know what happened with those particular contracts or in things such as that.
It went away during the recession as well.
Yeah, if you think about the timing of the end of 2007, start of 2008, when this was finally approved and the ordinance was finally signed off and completely ready to go, it could not have been worse timing right at the cusp of when everyone started holding investments and stopping gold plants. I mean, it was very, very unfortunate. And the extensions of the passage of time was actually not, that this board has not extended the NUPD up until today, up until this request. The extensions that occurred were all by state statute.
It was by state statute.
That's correct.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
But I was just wondering, because from my understanding, when I was sitting here, and probably sitting in the same place, I thought exactly that it was going to start that next week.
No one probably in the room would have wished that would have happened more than Mr. Jackson would have wished that would happen.
Okay.
Given his investment and his hopes and dreams for this property. Yes, that was very much what he was standing here and what he was counting on.
I remember.
Any idea how much has been invested in this project already?
So let me speak that. I'd love to speak to that.
I know how much my fees were. So they were not insubstantial.
So at the time that we got the final approval, this approval that Mr. Stars showed, we had spent more than $500,000 on the approval itself. It was hard to believe, but we spent more than $500,000 on this.
That was not on my fees.
And we had spent approximately $4.5 million on land purchases, so that totals $5 million. And additional legal fees and interest costs over the period of time since we began purchasing land. So we had a total investment at the time we received this approval of more than $6 million. And I'm very sorry to tell you that my investor partner in this transaction has made payments of $50,000 a month for now going on 8 years. And so as much as I appreciate the fact that the water and sewer capacity has got value today, I just don't know how we could have possibly. We are current on our loan. We've paid all the interest. We've paid every penny of interest to date. And it's a good project. It's in a great location. We continue to believe that development of this property will enhance downtown because it sends growth in that direction and ties into downtown ultimately. So it's a great site. It's a great project. We just have had no control over this terrible recession. So it's a lot of money.
Well, if I could maybe steer the conversation a little bit here to give the manager some guidance, have the board give the manager some guidance. First of all, just say I don't think anybody in this board wants to be an impediment to encouraging favorable development inside the town. That being said, I think the developer and your attorney appreciate the fact that we have special circumstances with the fact that we came out of a utility moratorium couple of years ago, and now we've given a lot of allocations out, so we're, I don't know how many months or years we're out for having to be in a moratorium again. So it makes the decision more difficult because this 15,000 gallons per day of capacity could represent a roadblock to other people in the future that are willing and able and ready to go. So it makes the decision much more cumbersome and difficult from the board's point of view. That being said, I think to move this forward, it will let each board member, express their opinion about how we would like to proceed. I think that might be useful to the manager so that he can bring back a sort of a plan of action and milestones, perhaps, of how we get from where we are today to where we need to be in terms of approval of extensions, approval of if we're going to amend our ordinances and whatnot. And I'll start. I would say that I would love to accommodate the applicant as best we can. I would probably support the three-year variety of extension for the MUPD. With respect to the water and sewer, I like the manager's option number 4, where you extend the 15,000 gallons per day for a year. And if the unused at the conclusion of the first year allocated water would be reduced to 10,000 for a period not to exceed 2 years. I would not necessarily be in favor of collecting any capital recovery fees until we see a site plan. Because of what I stated earlier, I think that the price tag on those capital recovery fees is likely to change over the next year or two. And I would not want to sell that commodity at a price much lower than its fair market value. So if I were to be the one giving guidance to the manager, I'd ask him to bring back a plan that helps us get to a point where we can see our way clear to the 3-year extension, and take your item number 4 there for the water and sewer. And now I defer to other board members to offer their opinions about what would be a reasonable accommodation to this applicant that doesn't unreasonably tie the town's hands going forward, knowing the facts that we're probably facing another moratorium. Because candidly, our plans for expanding our water and sewer plant are embryonic in places. We've got an engineering study that we've got an RFQ out for. It's going to take a year to do that, a year to decide what to do, right plan. So I don't see us even a very optimistic projection of when we will have more water and sewer capacity on site than we do today. I think 3 to 4 years would be optimistic, more likely to be 5, based on my experience with permitting through DENR and working with engineers and drawing plans and specs and all that sort of thing. I think we're 4 to 5 years out of having more sewer capacity. So that's my 2 cents, and I would offer each board member an opportunity to weigh in on what guidance would you like to give the manager going forward. Commissioner Farrell, would you like to start?
Mr. Groesbeck, yes, with the 15,000 allotment, where does that put our percent of wastewater?
Roughly a little bit, somewhere between 10 and 15%.
More. So where are we maxed out at now? I mean, where are we at now?
Roughly 120.
120.
Already allotted, it's not increasing anything, it's just.
Right, I'm not more of that.
But
I mean, if we allow them to have 15,000 gallons for 3 years, then we could possibly holding up 42 houses, as Mr. Terry said, for residential use.
Yeah, that's been allocated, right?
Right. And if they're not going to be using it, that's 15,000 that could go back into our allotment. Correct?
It would be placed back into that allotment. 120 would be 120, 135.
So
Okay.
I think what the manager's saying is our current available balance is approximately 125, but that's a moving number. It's plus or minus 5,000 gallons.
The question is how many houses would be built in the next year or 3 years anyway.
Well, we have some things coming down the pike, Habitat for Humanity, and we've got a building going in across the street, so things are picking up. We are going to get more requests. So any guidance you'd like to give the manager?
Well, I've got a question for the developer, and that is, knowing what you know today, how do you envision the development moving forward? And specifically what I'm requesting when I think about a construction project, a couple of different theories, and one is you build front and work your way to the back. Others are, now you start at the back and you work your way back out front. Do you know which way you think this thing is going to go? Do you have a vision for that?
We actually do. Well, we had a vision back in 2007, and it was actually both. It was build the front and the back and build towards the center. There was a phasing plan, and the phasing plan envisioned the front being a grocery store, retail, out parcels being the restaurants, as Mr. Jackson indicated. And at the back, we saw that more as an entertainment area with, we would be marketing to movie theaters, bowling alley, entertainment facilities towards the back. And then the office lifestyle center is a term of art, which would be more in the middle, would be later. But as a practical matter, I think the front comes first of the first phase. I think then and again, also helps anchor some of the public investment that needs to be done. Then you've got movies, entertainment, bowling, something like that towards the back, and then your lifestyle center, your high-end retail, office, residential in the middle being later phases. And Mr. Jackson, you correct me if I'm wrong, but that is what we had represented to this board back in 2007, and we haven't heard anything that would change those plans.
Well, like I mentioned when I first spoke, that I have not seen the plans, I'm not familiar with the plans, and I sure would like to see those plans.
Okay.
It would certainly help me. I mean, looking at these pictures, it's a very impressive and optimistic development, but that's
some would say
developers,
visionary,
right?
And whether it's ahead of its time,
Yeah.
is something we could discuss and debate.
So my direction that I would offer to the manager is I'd like to see the project documents that created the MUPD. I'd like for our staff to do the latest sewer analysis, because I know we've got a couple of different figures working, and I'd like to just have that in place to kind of consider. As far as the fees went, I thought it was odd that the closest thing to the MUPD was C2, when we've got another thing called a planned unit development, and this is a mixed-use planned development, so I just would ask the manager to revisit that idea. And then help me understand how one determines if somebody is diligently pursuing completion of the construction, and how might we judge that?
At the end of the day, it's the proof is in the pudding. You give us a date certain in 3 years, we have to have that site plan filed in 3 years. It's actually pretty clear in your ordinance.
No, I understand that completely, but it does talk about construction of the required improvements and diligently pursuing them. So I just like, for my own knowledge, how the town interprets that phrase of diligence. Is it construction? Is it planning? Is it permitting? How do we make that call so that the entire community knows how to make the call? So I would like to see those documents before I made a decision.
And how current city's files are, town's files are, I don't know, but I can have copies made and provided Mr. Grisbeck of the plans that were submitted.
That'd be great.
And I have a copy of that, not tonight, but I can get those to him the next weekend.
listers. I think it'd be useful.
I think
That would make it go through the whole EPD process all over again. I think the only person here was present. Yeah, I was asking Commissioner Fiocco if he just wants to review them himself, or did you think it would be useful to, since I think only Commissioner Baldwin was here when the MUPD was presented, would it be useful for a 30, 45-minute presentation, sort of a practice, a mock reapplication for the NEPD, just as an information piece? Does the board find that useful? Since it's really not familiar, Commissioner Fielder is not the only one who has not seen the plans in any detail. I've seen them, but I haven't studied them. They were sort of on the shelf when I came to town in 2007, but I was not part of the process that got approved.
I mean, we definitely want to be transparent and want to be cooperative and informative. And I also understand your need for good information to make these types of decisions. So the short answer will be yes. The longer answer is we'd like to have some indication. We'd hate to go through all this. At the end of the day, have you decide that we're not. And I understand what you said, Mr. Chair, that you were inclined to allow us to have 3 years the zoning going forward. And that if that were the will of the board, then that we'd be glad to come in and bring you up to speed as to what occurred back then. I wouldn't want that to be wasting our time or your time otherwise, though.
Well, as I recall, that and looking at the plans that you held up there, just copying that's going to be expensive, and you agreed to give Commissioner Fiocco a copy. I don't know if anybody else wants a copy, but that'd be a lot of, that'd be several $100 per copy, I'm sure.
It would.
Yeah.
So I'd like, again, as much clarity as you could provide to us as to where we stand. Glad to come in and lay this all out, but again, I don't want it to be a waste of your time.
Okay.
And money or ours.
Do other board members want to review that plan, or would you be satisfied to have a plan set in Mr. Bass's office that any of us could go look at? Or
Is it online? Is it available online before? No.
I don't know.
Maybe that would be a way just to put it online and read it on.
Back then, it's not.
As a way to save your expenses, somehow. I guess that's still a lot of scanning and whatnot.
It's not currently online. I don't know. I mean, when you say review plans, I mean, what do we want to look at and start there?
Does it need to be the entire thing or just a portion?
well, it's a good day. My recollection is it'd take you more than a day to get through it. You wanted to read it in detail.
It was, we jumped through a lot of hoops to try to satisfy a lot of competing interests to try to make sure it was there that the end result was a very, very good plan. The town held our feet to the fire and wanted to make sure, so we put a lot of time and effort into it. Again, glad to do that, but again, we're not in a position to go back and refile or make amendments or changes at this point. And again, I think, and so we'd have to think, we're glad to provide you information, but for what purpose? And to bring you up to speed, that's fine, but again, we're looking at investments of kind of where we stand and, do we pack our bags at this point? We don't want to, but that's kind of why we're here, is to get the will. Is this something you want us to continue to market this plan that we spent a lot of time into, which is why we're asking for the extension. Bill, do you want to comment?
Just one, if I may, one practical suggestion. One way to do this is to consider approving the one-year extension tonight. There's only roughly 9 months left under that current term from the time it would start. And if you chose to, you could approve the 15,000-gallon extension for just 1 year while you went further with this text change amendment. And if you wanted to go through and review this thoroughly at this point, you could do it. It's just essentially, it is an approved plan, and from a practical standpoint, a lot of it is in the future. I'm pretty familiar. I doubt that people would have a lot of concern, frankly. It's really well worth it. So if there's a way to to do the one-year extension. Like, that's one alternative that comes to it.
And to instruct the town manager to put the public notice out for the text amendment to be heard at the next meeting. Or if there's some, as soon as right, but that would be a next step for the text amendment.
For what it's worth, I think the 1 year sounds agreeable to me to give us some time to look at it and give you a little bit of time to review the plans. I'd be at your discretion or in direction as to whether or not you want to, I guess, start that ball rolling as far as the text amendment is concerned.
Well, I don't think we're ready to pass any resolutions tonight to extend anything that the manager needs, at least to the next meeting.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm not necessarily saying that tonight, but I mean, I think ultimately getting to the point where we extend this 1 year, whether you do that at the next meeting or the meeting after that, I think that's probably agreeable from our standpoint and gives you enough time to be able to look at everything and consider options. I think even if you did have the text amendment fully processed and in front of you, it's something that at least, without some other things in place to kind of make sure that we're taking care of on the capacity piece. 3 to 5 years is a little bit discomforting to me, but 1 year gives us enough time to really flush it out.
Well, my interest is to familiarize myself with the request
Mm-hmm.
fully, and I think if I can have the documents, I can definitely be prepared on 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
And I think one of the most powerful arguments that I've heard this evening is the possibility of reversion.
That's the alternative.
My recollection is that there was one full set of these plans in the planning director's office and another full set in the manager's office. Do we want to verify that and make one of those available to Commissioner Fiocco rather than have the developer go through the...
Mr. Grisbeck could call me tomorrow. If he needs one, we'll be happy.
You can find them. They're old files.
I've been hard pressed to come up with them. It predates a couple managers, so.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're on the fourth one actually.
But I haven't found them yet. But Stuart may have something.
Yeah, I think those are set.
I personally am fine with coming by here and looking at it.
I was going to say, as long as they're available at the planning office,
Yeah,
I would like to do that. I mean, I really am available too.
I think, I'd have to look, but I think there's a full set. It's in a box.
Yeah, but my recollection was that there was a...
Yeah, there may be one back there now. I'd have to look.
And all you have to do is come to Stewart's conference room and sit and look at them there, so...
Well,
Actually, there's more than one box.
I'm going to look at them when I can, where I can, and I don't think it's a cost prohibitive.
No, I can make a copy.
Yeah.
Let's just put that.
Okay.
I'll make a copy and I'll have it to you by the end of the week.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and simplify that real quick. You'll have a copy.
We can put it on a public Dropbox for that matter.
I would really like paper.
Yeah, I'm sure I don't
Do it
have
on
a
screen
digital
work.
copy of that.
Yeah.
Mr. Perico's like myself. It's something like actually going through this and see how the documents relate to one another, because there's a lot of cross references too.
I'm
So
sure.
that will be in Mr. Grisbeck's office by the end of this week.
Great. Thank you.
No, I was just saying, if anybody out there,
Right.
civilians wanted to look at it, we can certainly get a hold of it online. But you have an electronic version of it, just no.
Not that I know where it is. I can look for it. But it wouldn't be that hard to scan these as PDFs.
Okay. Well, we'll start with paper and go from there.
Okay?
Well, with the amount that's invested in this project, it seems like you all are committed to making this project work.
We're trying. We certainly are doing what we can. And again, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. What I hear is that, the 1 year extension which you have in your current ordinance is something that, at this point, board would be inclined, and the 3 years seems reasonable, but you want more information before taking this step. Is that kind of what I hear?
That's where I am.
That's where I am.
Okay. But thank you very much for your time. We'll continue to work with Mr. Messinger and Mr. Grisbeck, provide this information, and we'll be happy to come back next week, next meeting, to at that time answer more questions.
Now, before we let this go, Mr. Gruesbeck, do you feel like you have a sense of where we're headed, or do you have some questions for the board?
No, I think what we're going to do, if I could try to repeat what I've heard, I think what we're going to do is we're going to get the plans, we're going to let you guys know where they're available. In the meantime, we're going to put pen to paper on the options and try to flesh out some of the other things that we can do long term. More immediately, I think between now and the next meeting, you just want to get yourself familiar with it. I think at the next meeting, if you feel appropriate, to do so, you'll review and take action or not take action on extending it for 1 year.
Okay. Does the board want to see a resolution to accomplish that extension at their next meeting, or do you want to wait a meeting beyond that?
I think we should be prepared to take action next meeting.
Okay.
You can see the resolution, just not take action on it.
That's true. So that would be a 1-year extension on the MUPD zoning. What about the water piece?
I think they're linked at this point.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So that would be item 4 under your options. Or just the plain 1 year, or item 2?
Number 2.
Item 2.
Yeah, it would just be plain 1 year. Right
Okay,
from the get-go.
item 2, okay. Okay, so I think we have a consensus, it'll bring us a yeah.
I have one thing to say. If you could give us just an estimate also in reference to the prepayment of a portion of the capital recovery fee.
Yeah,
I'd just like to see that for an FYI.
I have that, as Commissioner Fiocco indicated, he's wondering how we got to that point. Because it depends on the actual zoning use, and then the zoning use will have a calculation. And not to complicate matters, when Commissioner Farrow was talking about it, it kind of, to me, I was purposely dancing around because it kind of depends on how much they want to come in. If they come in for all of the acreage, it's substantial. So, but I don't think that we're under the assumption that they're going to come in for all the acreage right out of the box. So it's difficult, sounding like an attorney, that depends. I mean, but yeah, I can give you how we came up with those numbers and shed a little bit more light on Commissioner Fiocco's question.
Great.
I think it's a great question.
And thank you for your time and patience. It's important to us, and again, I'm not sure how much time you want to spend tonight, and we feel very appreciative of the time you gave us tonight. Thank you very much.
Okay. Talked about that a long time, I guess we're done. Item number 2, more business is water and sewer rate analysis, and our finance director Nancy Emsley and David Tucker are going to lead this discussion.
And there you go. Thank you, Mr. Town Manager. It's been a long time coming, but since I was tasked by the board to complete a financial analysis of our water and sewer enterprise fund, and as we got more involved in the process, we discovered that we needed to rely on some outside expertise, and so we partnered ourselves with the School of Government and the Environmental Finance Center, and I've had the privilege to work with David Tucker from that institution. He'll be speaking after my very brief presentation, because I really would like to focus on what information we gleaned with working with the School of Government. So my financial analysis that I provided to you earlier covered the period of fiscal year 2008 to through October 2015. And so thank you, Brian. And so our goal was to complete this financial analysis for, as I mentioned, for the fund. And this, what you see, is a composite of the town's operating revenue and expenditures for that period of 2008 through 2014. And this slide also shows the non-operating revenues and expenditures as well. And what you can see here is that that revenue has been declining since fiscal year 2011, while expenditures have been steadily increasing by approximately 6% each year since fiscal year 2009. One of the things I'd like to point out here is one of the ratios that I looked at as far as financial analysis was what is called a total margin ratio. And what this does, it examines the total revenues, the total expenditures over this period of time. And the benchmark that you try to shoot for is at least 1%, at least 1.0 or 1% of this, and we have been, our ratio has been below that benchmark for the last 3 years. We'll see that in a future slide, but I just want to tell you that it's referring to this information that you're seeing here. In addition, with the information that you see here, the charge to expense ratio comes into play, where this is to try to determine our self-sufficiency and making sure that we're staying solvent to the extent that our services are covering our total revenues and our total expenditures. Our service charges are covering our total expenditures. And our ratio, again, has been below the benchmark for the past 3 years or so, and we're about 0.9%, which means we're operating about 10% lower than where we should be as far as at least trying to break even. If we can go to the next slide, please. This next slide is just showing a little bit more of showing that we're not covering our full operating costs and expenditures, and also we're not covering any future capital costs at the same time. This slide represents the income or loss before capital contributions and transfers, and it also shows the change in net assets and the change in fund balance. And our water and sewer fund balance has been steadily declining since fiscal year 2010. Also here we can see, as far as another financial indicator, is our percentage change in net assets. And this is used to analyze the magnitude of our financial position, whether it's improved or deteriorated. And this has a natural benchmark of 0% because we want it to be at least that or higher. And so here we have had showing a positive balance there. The other thing that we look at that would be relevant here is our net asset ratio, and this is used to track determine whether we have the ability to address long-term debts. And unrestricted net assets they're looking to see a benchmark of at least 2%, and that's one of the areas that it would help us to cover any long-term debts. And right now, this ratio was 1.24 in fiscal year 2008, and currently it's 0.57. So it's a pretty significant decrease over time. If we could go to the next slide, please. This is just a recap of what I was telling you about earlier regarding the total margin ratio. Where again we're at 0.91%. We need to be at least at 1% or better, and then again. Looking at our charge expense ratios, again, pretty close to our total margin ratio, where we're looking at 0.90. Again, we should be looking at a benchmark of 1.0 or better. The other thing I want to mention here in looking at these slides is that the quick ratio is another thing that is something to be looking at, and that it's used to track our dimension of liquidity and just seeing what we have to address short-term allocations. Now, this is actually a good ratio that we have in that the benchmark is usually 2.0 or higher, and you can see we're at 4.5. So this 4.05, which means that we can cover our obligations, and we've got about a little over a year's worth of money that we'd be able to cover if we were to receive no revenue for going forward. So that's one thing I just want to tell you, that not all the ratios are in a negative or lower than what they should be. And the other thing I want to mention is the capital assets condition ratio that you see at the end. This analyzes our capital, and it's representing the useful life of our assets. And we are in a negative position there, we should be in a positive position. So very quickly, I'm going to go to the next slide here. This is actually just showing you where we are for our projection for 2015 from to the month of the end of October. And if we continue with revenues the way that they are currently, I'm projecting that we would have, after depreciation, a net loss of about $600,000. So that's if we kept all of our expenditures current and revenue at the same level. So that's why we're having this conversation, is that, if we can go to the next slide, Brian, is that our financial analysis has indicated that a rate increase is necessary, and it's necessary to maintain our sustainability, to build our fund balance that we need for future capital improvements. Next slide. And so, as I mentioned, we have been working with the UNC Environmental Finance Center to analyze the impact of a rate increase, how would it affect our customers' affordability. And to recap, our analysis has shown that our current rates are just not covering our operating and maintenance expenses, also including depreciation. And so what we'll be doing next is I'll be turning the presentation over to David Tucker, and we'll see that using the EFC dashboard and the affordability modules, that we're able to explore what some of our alternatives will be in scenarios as far as looking at a rate increase for the town of Pittsboro. And we were being very mindful of the effect of rate risk, of the shock of a high rate risk, and also trying to be mindful of how the usage will be affected from a rate increase. And so at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to David Tucker. Again, he has been a wonderful asset in working, it has been a delight to work with, and we'll go into a little bit more detail regarding what our financial analysis has determined and what a rate increase would look like for the town of Pittsboro. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Emsley, Mayor Terry, commissioners of the board, members of the professional staff. It's an honor to have the chance to speak to you this evening. So thank you for granting me that opportunity, and it has been a pleasure working with Mr. Gruesbeck and Ms. Emsley on preparing this analysis and this presentation, which I hope will be of some help to you today and going forward in your efforts. Very good. As Ms. Emsley mentioned, I do work for the Environmental Finance Center at the School of Government, just up the road from you. We're your neighbors at UNC Chapel Hill. And for those of you not already familiar with our center, the EFC is dedicated to enhancing the ability of local government organizations like your own and others to provide important environmental services like water and wastewater services in a financially sustainable, fair, and effective way. And we do that in a variety of ways, including applied research, teaching and outreach, and program design and evaluation. And in fact, one of my colleagues and the director of our center, Jeff Hughes, is here with us in the audience today also. And I'm pleased that he is here as well. We are great admirers of the work that you do for Pittsboro. It's a very important responsibility to discharge, obviously, to maintain the water and wastewater systems with their value at promoting public health and economic development and well-being. The opportunity to do this analysis and work with your very fine staff here has been afforded to us by a couple of funders that I want to just very briefly acknowledge their financial support for the work of our center. The North Carolina Department of Environment and Natural Resources. We have a project funding from them through their public water supply section as part of the Division of Water Resources. And I just wanted to say very quickly that for those of you who would like to provide Any feedback on the work that we have done, positive, I hope, critical or otherwise, these are key contacts at NC Diener who you could contact about what we have been working on. Also, we are engaged with other environmental finance centers in a network that we participate in around the United States to do work for the Smart Management for Small Water Systems project funded by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. We work in a variety of different areas, as you can see on the screen here, from rate setting and financial management to energy management, water loss reduction and prevention. And so that project has also helped to bring us here before you today. The goal of this effort was to work with Ms. Emsley and Mr. Grusbeck to review the water and wastewater rates currently in effect for the town of Pittsboro and determine if and how they might be modified to fully fund the Water and Wastewater Enterprise Fund now and into the future. Fully fund meaning, as Ms. Emsley was saying, not only to cover your current operating and maintenance expenses where the bills due today and tomorrow and so on, but also to fund necessary maintenance on and capital improvements to the system. The work that we've done could be characterized as a rate structure review. I would say that it is not the same as if you were to hire a private consulting firm to do a very in-depth rate study and look at every detail of your operating expenses and how they might be tweaked or studied. Ours has been a little more top level here, but hopefully will be of good value to you. The issues, which Ms. Emsley has already spoken to, as we have understood them in this analysis, have been that rates are not covering the full current operating cost plus future capital costs for the system. At present, this is you're still able to do what you've needed to do here by drawing down some of the fund balance in the enterprise fund, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Also, since peaking in fiscal year 2010-2011, your water sales and revenues have declined somewhat, while at the same time expenses have been increasing by that average of around 6% per year. And in addition, as has been mentioned earlier in this meeting this evening, it does appear that your water and sewer systems will need expansion across the next 5, 10, and 20 years. The good news, one of several pieces of good news that I can point out, is that in the last several years, 2012 through 14 fiscal years, the revenues from water and wastewater sales were sufficient to cover basic operating and maintenance expenses. However, when also including that accounting term of depreciation to reflect not a bill that is due today, but rather a projection for the kind of capacity you need to maintain the system across time and do maintenance and capital improvement projects. When including that number, the shortfall has been around $250,000 a year in the last several years. Hence those ratios that Ms. Emsley was pointing out of around 0.90, 0.91 of what we would refer to as an operating ratio, but goes by those other names as well. I also would point out that while the enterprise fund balance from fiscal year 2008 through 2014 has been declining steadily across that period of time to help make up some of the shortfall here, there is more good news, which is the Water and Sewer Capital Reserve Fund that you have established has been growing steadily across the same period, the balance now being up to above $1.4 million, funded by some of your one-time upfront connection fees for your customers. And the combined balance of the two funds across that period of time has been fairly stable, around $2.5 million. So this would qualify as some good news. And as you can see from this chart, In the blue, the enterprise fund declining, as I was just saying, the capital reserve fund increasing, the sum of the two being fairly consistent across that period of time. And then if you overlay on the next slide in with that, the total operating expenses, in this case still including depreciation, has tracked fairly closely to that combined fund balance. And so from a conservative standpoint of wanting to have enough of the funds on hand to correspond to that, that would also be a positive. And if you bring up the next slide, I don't want to take too much of your time for this tool because I want to focus more on the analysis that I have been working with Ms. Emsley and Mr. Grusbeck on. But we have the tool, and for those of you who haven't seen it before, I commend it to you for your use. We have actually just updated it today with fresh data, including for your most recent rates for the town of Pittsboro. We call it our dashboard, our water and wastewater rates dashboard. It is a free online interactive tool that anyone can use to look at water and wastewater rates for utilities like yours and all across the state of North Carolina. We have about 95% of the water and wastewater utilities we have surveyed and crunched the data and put them into this tool. And Mr. Grusbeck, if you could, like we talked about, launch on your web browser the tool, I will just take a couple minutes of your time, if I may, to give you the highlights of how that tool works, and then return to the rates analysis model. And if you click on, yes, there we go. That should launch it right up there. And I think we need to shrink the size of it a little bit. There we go. And you can scroll down a bit, and then if you can bring up Pittsboro on the utility selector there, you can just start. There you go. And very good. This is a tool that we find a lot of utilities make use of and give us positive feedback on its value to them. Basically, in this case, you can see these 4 dials, and the upper left-hand one of them, the bill comparison dial, this is showing you, and corresponding those dots you see on the map of the state of North Carolina, this is showing you where a typical bill, at this point it is for water only, for 5,000 gallons a month, and you can use that slider on the left to slide the quantity up or down by 500 gallons. You can also select sewer only or water and sewer combined. But in this case, with a 5,000 gallon a month residential water bill, which might be a pretty typical kind of consumption for a residential customer, it comes to $38.26 a month at your current rates. And Mr. Grusbeck, if you'd select the combined water and sewer bill, please, comes to $90.94 a month. And we sort of color-coded that dial to, at the top in the middle, you see that dark green, that's the middle 50% of the data of all of the utilities in the sample. However many that is, 387 rate structures or something, can't quite see from here. And then the light green is the next 15%, and the yellow is the bottom and the 10 top percent. So you are outside that middle 50%, a little bit higher than that, but not a lot higher than that. The other dials, we have the conservation signal dial. It's saying that at a higher, more discretionary amount of usage of a residential customer, going from 10 to 11,000 gallons a month, is the price signal that's being sent by the utility to the customer kind of a strong one, kind of a weak one, encourages conservation, encourages not conservation, buy more water, more sewerage services, and you're sending a pretty strong conservation signal there. In the lower right corner, the affordability dial. Affordability is, of course, a potentially long and complicated discussion that I'm sure we do not have unlimited time for tonight. But one way into that conversation would be to look at the MHI, or median household income data, collected by the U.S. Census Bureau, and to take a year of bills divided by the MHI for Pittsboro. It's an approximation of your customers in your service area, not an exact lineup from your citizens to your customers there. But in this case, with water and sewer at 5,000 gallons a month, at your current rates, it's a little over 2% in that green range there, which is probably for a median customer going to be fairly affordable, perhaps not for your least affluent customers, but we are talking about in the middle there, right at 50% of the data. And then the last dial here, the cost recovery dial, there's more than one way to look at cost recovery. In this case, it is again the operating revenues divided by the operating expenses, including depreciation, and we're seeing that 0.91 measurement again. The tool does afford you an ability to play around with a few scenarios. So, for example, beneath the map, there's a slider which can be slid anywhere up to 100%. Hopefully, you wouldn't end up raising rates 100% in 1 year, but it does give you a beginning of a simulation of what the effects would be on all four of the dials that I've just been describing. We have programmed in there with, the laws of supply and demand, the idea that may or may not be a good fit for your actual customer base here, but that in general, if you raise the rates by 10%, you're going to see a 3% decline in demand. And finally, on this tab, I would point out right above the map, we have a little drop down where it says all utilities there. We've programmed in a number of what we call comparison groups, where if you want to look at a narrower slice of the data, like utilities about the same size, same number of accounts, in the same river basin, similar customer income, all of those options are available. And there are several other tabs for this tool. There's a financial benchmarks tab right next to the rates comparison tab. If Mr. Grusbeck, you could, very good. And this gives you some graphical representation with the dials, again, of some of the metrics that Ms. Emsley was talking about, such as your quick ratio, measure of your liquidity is in very good shape, as well as your current days of cash on hand. Currently, your debt service coverage ratio is in good shape. I should add that these are figures, these financial figures are about a year behind, because we will get an update for all of the utilities in the state from the Local Government Commission of North Carolina next month in February. So unlike your rates, these numbers are currently a year behind that. The characteristics tab gives you a few just basic summary level statistics, and the links tab a few useful links. And so with that, I would like to pivot back to the rates analysis itself. And while Mr. Grusbeck is bringing the slide presentation back up, I will just say that we have an Excel-based tool, Microsoft Excel-based tool, our water and sewer rates analysis model that we've already provided copies of to your staff. We'll be able to manipulate it, change the inputs and the assumptions in it going forward, rate increase numbers, expense numbers, projections about the future. Right, and if you can advance to the next slide there, excellent, thank you. It does project the tool, revenues, expenses, and end-of-year fund balance. In this case, we put in essentially the combination of those two funds we were seeing before, for simplicity's sake, into the tool. Projection for up to 20 years. You can modify the rates data in the next 5 years in the tool, the way it's currently formulated. And we used the data provided by your staff. This table shows your current water and sewer rates for the town of Pittsboro. We have, two sets of meters by size of the meter, and so two sets of base charges there. If you advance to the next slide, you have very few accounts that fall under the greater than 1-inch meter size. So for the simplicity of the modeling, since it's a fairly complex model to begin with, we just went with a more conservative assumption on the basis of revenues that all of the meters were less than or equal to 1 inch. with those lower base charges there. And then there are your variable charges below that, or your volumetric rates, I should say. This is just the cover page of the rates analysis model, just to give you a little visual of it. There's a lot of tabs. I didn't want to bore you with showing you all of those right now, but if we can go to the next slide. It seems that for this modeling, the key questions have been, what should the water and sewer fund balance target be? And there could be a lot of answers to that. Your colleagues in other municipalities around the state of North Carolina arrive at varying answers to that. We went with a fairly conservative number here of $2.7 million, equal to, from your fiscal year 2014 annual financial report, a year of your operating expenses, including the depreciation. As a policy question, there are other ways you could go with that. You could exclude the depreciation. You could go with 6 months instead of a year. It really all goes to what your plans are and what the needs are you perceive for the system, and what fund balances are needed in both of the two funds to accommodate that, along with your other financing strategies. The second key question, in addition to the current water and sewer debt financing that you're paying off in an accelerated rate right now, what will the capital needs be in the next 5 years for the system, and how will you finance that? Out of cash, out of new debt, out of a combination of the two? There are a number of options that are available to you there. And thirdly, how to keep the water and sewer rates affordable for your customers, for all your customers across the board, but of course, for your least affluent customers, I'm sure is one of the concerns that you have as well. And if we could go to the next slide, please. We could come up with a lot of different scenarios, dozens easily, for how to go about this. I've come up with 3 basic scenarios here, none of which is necessarily a recommendation on our part that you should do X. Rather, to try and raise some of the key questions for your consideration and for your planning purposes going forward. It would not surprise me at all if whatever the board eventually decides to do does not look exactly like any of these scenarios. But each of these varies the inputs into the model in a way that I think helps to shed light on an important question. So for the first one, scenario A, it's the generally business as usual scenario. And what I mean by that is, in this case, nothing has been input into the model corresponding to this term depreciation, which is accounted for in your fiscal year 2014 annual financial statement as about $534,000, if I remember correctly. There is no entry into the model for any new debt on top of what you're already paying the principal and interest on. But of course, it does account for the principal and interest payments that you do have. That will tail off very quickly after the next couple of fiscal years, and then be down, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of $62,000 or so for a number of years going out after that. The next scenario, which I term scenario B, is one where you do start to collect and spend more for maintenance of the capital stock. In this case, we went with a number, a fairly arbitrary number, admittedly, of $250,000 a year for each of the next 20 years, which would be roughly equivalent to a little under half of that $534,000 depreciation number for fiscal year 2014. The idea being here that if all you are doing going forward is, for the sake of argument, not tapping the capital reserve fund that you have for the water and sewer system, which you could, but all you're doing going forward is you have the debt that you already have in place, but you're going to provide some rate increases and raise enough revenue to be able to spend about $250,000 a year on maintenance of the system. So there's that scenario. And then the third one, the scenario C, is a bit more money on top of that for capital. So this number is truly kind of plucked out of midair, I admit. of a theoretical future loan of $1 million with terms across 30 years at a fairly low 3% interest rate, similar perhaps to what might be available through the state revolving fund. And with principal interest payments beginning in fiscal year 2017, those would come to about $52,000 a year. This is not to say that with $1 million you would be at all likely to be able to build a large new sewer plant, for example. On the other hand, if you look at scenarios B and C in tandem with each other, you could see how if there were a rate increase sufficient to fund $250,000 a year of maintenance on the system, that would also be possible, say, to cover at these terms the principal interest payments on, say, a $5 million loan. But in this case, just for the sake of argument, the scenario C is modeled on a $1 million loan on top of that $250,000 a year that's being spent on maintenance on the system. So if we could go to the next slide. To go from an operating ratio, including depreciation, in 1 year of 0.91 up to something that I sort of glossed over very quickly, but with our dashboard on our cost recovery dial, we've got the green, sort of positive region beginning at a 1.2 ratio. Now, that is again kind of an arbitrary number on our part, but it embodies this idea of that extra 20% that you're recovering through your rates is going into your capital improvement fund, so it will be spent in the coming years on improvements to the system. To go all the way from 0.91 to 0.12, to 1.2 in 1 year, that would be a very, very large rate increase. Even to go half that way between 1.0 and 1.2 to 1.1 would still be a big rate increase. So there's a little bit of phasing in with all three of these models. In the first year, fiscal year 2016, the rate increases are sufficient to still get you above 1.0, gets you a little bit farther than 1.02, and then there are much smaller increases in most or all of the next 4 years to get you to 1.1. Now, where the board ultimately decides you want to be on this kind of ratio number is a matter for your debate and based upon your policies and your plans. But in any event, getting above 1.0 would probably be advantageous for the longer term. As I was reminded earlier today, if part of your strategy in the future were to pursue additional debt financing in the future, such as from the state of North Carolina, such as through the state revolving fund, the various agencies, DENR, Local Government Commission, probably would look more favorably upon you being in the black than in the red on that ratio there. That having been said, we still shouldn't lose sight of the fact that you are bringing in enough revenue right now to pay the bills exclusive of depreciation. So I've been going on at the sort of conceptual level for a while. Let me give you some actual concrete numbers to look at now. In this scenario A I was describing, this is not after 1 year, but it's after the entire 5 years, the way this has been modeled. This is where the rate numbers would end up. And so the base charge, you might recall, was $13 for water inside the limits, the city limits, and I believe it was $14 for sewer inside. And so in both cases, it's gone up somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% here. And then the volumetric rates also have increased, but at a slower rate. You could increase them at the same rate. You could reverse the process, and you could increase the volumetric rates at a percentage rate faster than the base rate. But in this case, the base charge is increasing the faster than the volumetric rates are. And again, this is the scenario A that does not assume any new money going for capital improvements beyond, well, not as much as in scenarios B and C. So if you'd advance to the next slide, in a large part, scenario A is really just keeping up with inflation, honestly, and getting your ratios above 1.0, and maintaining your fund balance at a very conservative and high level. In this next scenario, you can see the base charges are higher still, the volumetric rates are higher still. This is where you're doing that extra $250,000 a year on maintenance on the system. And in scenario C, the next slide, the numbers are not very different from scenario B. They're a little bit higher in all cases, but this is where you also have that hypothetical $1 million low-interest loan. Now, in all of this, there is, as we were saying a moment ago, the question of how to maintain rates that are affordable for your customers. It is a good question, and it is a bit of a difficult question, in fact. We also have a tool we call our affordability assessment model. It's another Excel-based tool, and I've also provided copies of that to your staff, and I've shown them how to manipulate that as well. This tool, basically, we ran it for the full 5 years of rate increases with the scenario C. We made the assumption that the median household income remains flat for the next 5 years. Of course, I do not have a crystal ball. I cannot tell you what will happen with that. But based upon what I've been seeing and hearing about development in your community, and if there is not another recession in the future, and if current trends continue, you might see that continue to sort of slowly rise. And that would make the, at least for the median customer, the pain not felt quite as keenly. But in this case, this is a bit of kind of a shock therapy scenario here, going from the current rates where a bill, combined water and wastewater bill, 5,000 gallons a month, comes to over $90, and that comes to a little over 2% of median household income. The alternative rates, it would increase to over $150 a month and would come to just shy of 3.5% of median household income. And obviously, it would be a larger percentage for those in the lowest income brackets. And I can say more about the affordability particulars there. There certainly are other indicators to look at besides median household income, to look at the poverty rate, the percentage of your customers who are on supplemental Social Security and things like that, and SNAP benefits. But this at least begins that conversation about affordability and how it's to be maintained, and raises questions about things like, would some kind of an affordability program like OWASA has for their customers be worth looking into? And these are things we'd be happy to talk more with you about. So let me pause at this point and invite any questions from members of the board, and I'd be glad to try and answer them.
Well, I'll make the first observation. If you can go to your last slide. Yeah, I'll just comment that when we're talking about affordability, this option makes the assumption that the greater percentage increases in the base rate rather
Correct.
than the volumetric rate,
Correct.
which is in effect sort of a regressive way to do it, because
Yes.
the rate increase for a widow living alone is the same as it is for our largest water customer. Let's say it goes up $20 a month for the widow living alone. It would also go up $20 a month for all of Chapel Ridge, which is our biggest customer, which is as a housing area.
Right.
So if we want to be sensitive to affordability issues and our least affluent customers like you talked about, I would think that we would want to flip-flop that and put the lion's share of the increase in the volumetric rather than in the base charge, so that the biggest users are frankly feeling the most pain. Our big users are a big commercial user is Chapel Ridge, and other,
Yes.
we don't have a lot of big commercial customers that they do. But I'll let them off the hook by having the lion's share of the increased fee and the base charge.
I think, Mr. Mayor, that's a very good set of observations on your part, very legitimate points you're raising. And of course, in each of these options, there are always trade-offs. As you say, in a scenario different from this one, where you either did it at the same rate, or as you say, you raised the base charge at a slower rate and the variable charges at a faster rate, that could be and probably would be more affordable, especially for less affluent customers and or for customers who are using less. And of course, those two, we don't know for certain, always line up to be the same. But they could. At the same time, where the base charge is raised at a faster rate from the utility standpoint, it can provide a certain additional degree of revenue stability in the face of things such as a major drought or some kind of other major disruption to people buying water and wastewater services. So definitely pluses and minuses in each case. We'll be updating next month the annual report that we do on water and wastewater services around the state of North Carolina. Looking at last year's report, your current rates, your base charges for the inside customers, the $13 and the $14 are just a shade below the median for the state, and your volumetric rates are just a shade above the median for the state. But of course, in the end, what you want to look at, I'm sure, is what's best for your situation and your customers and your utility. But you're right that the model could be run very differently, and I think it would be very easy for Ms. Emsley and Mr. Grusbeck to flip those numbers around if that is how you directed them to do so.
I guess it's hard to project that way because if the rates go up, then people tend to use less water, so it would be hard to put a number on.
It's true, and we have attempted to model that as best we can in the rates model, just as we do in the dashboard, with the assumption of for every 10% increase in the rates, that there'll be a 3% decline. Now, how would your customers actually behave here? Would it be less elastic, as economists would say? Would it be more elastic? Would it decline by 1%? Would it decline by 5%? Unfortunately, I cannot tell you that. However, that is something that definitely does bear thinking about, as you say, Commissioner.
Yeah, we've had recent examples in our last drought. I remember Siler City, and they put in drought restrictions, and their usage went down, so they put an across-the-board $10 increase on their base charge. And I recall folks being served by OWASA, they were asked to conserve, and they did a very good job of conserving, and OWASA's revenues were plummeting, so they rewarded their customers for such good conservation practices by dramatically increasing their rates so that their revenues went back to what they were. So yeah, so we've had two examples of that in our last drought, how that can be a slippery slope. So.
Indeed. And for those customers who are working from their perspective diligently to conserve their use and put in low-flow shower heads and low-flush toilets and things like that, they might be not happy to see the volumetric rates go up as they're trying to reduce their use. So whatever scenario you choose to employ for rate increases, there certainly will be some trade-offs. Some kind of a hybrid scenario seems almost inevitable to me here in terms of which pieces you raise the rates on and how you phase the rates increase in. You may choose to do it more slowly than it's modeled in any of these scenarios here. You might not go all the way to the 1.0 ratio in the first year. You might do that across 2 years to reduce the potential rate shock and impact in a smaller period of time on your customers. Well, if there are no other questions, we are at your disposal and that of your staff to answer more questions in the future. I hope it wasn't too much of a blizzard of numbers and charts there. I do think that there is some good news, as I pointed out here for you. And from the work that we do around the state, we have seen a number of utilities who are in a much worse financial position than here, some that are better, and we certainly wish you the best with your decision-making about rate increases and financial management. Yes,
I have a
Commissioner.
question. So the dashboard seems to play a lot with how you can adjust the scenarios by adding rates.
Yes.
Are there is it equipped with a way to manage results from an expense management perspective?
Not the dashboard as such, but the race model. There are inputs for expenses which allow you to model different scenarios. That way you could, so not this tool, but I didn't actually show you the Excel tool itself here. Just the cover sheet of it. But you're right that there are ways to play with the expenses that are put in there. And in fact, those three scenarios, A, B, C, do play with what's being put in to be spent additionally on capital. I know that one thing your staff has already been looking at in recent times has been other ways to reduce expenses, whether it is looking at non-revenue water or water loss or administrative expenses. This was not a focus of the study that I did, but I think it's always a good thing to look at, and ratepayers obviously themselves are going to want to know that whatever can be done is being done on cost control before raising rates.
It's a great tool.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure working with your staff, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate all the work you and Nancy have done, and I think this will probably be one of the subjects we tackle during our upcoming retreat. So I think we can let it go for now.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I have one question for Mr. Gruisbeck, and regarding the water that we make daily in comparison to the water that we gain revenue. What percent loss are we at on what we make and what we use or what we sell?
I'd have to get back to you with that number off the top of my head. I don't know that.
Okay. I thought at one time we were somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 25%. Does that seem too high? Does it seem like a number we worked with in the past?
Before I start quoting a number, I want to go back to see what that basis is.
Okay.
Fred's mentioned different numbers, and I think maybe a bit high.
Okay.
I think that was the last time we asked the question. I think I asked it, and he said, well, I don't think it's that high.
So, I mean, 20 to 25% of the number that's been thrown out, I don't think it's that high. I mean, I think we're losing a significant amount that's got to be taken care of. And we've taken some steps to do that. But there's obviously a lot more work to be done. And that's where that depreciation comes in. The system gets older.
Right.
And so that's kind of the stage that we're at.
Okay, thank you again. If we're done with that item, we're moving on to item number 3, zoning request amended from used property. Mr. Bass, will you introduce this one?
Yes, sir. This is rezoning 2014-02, Hughes rezoning as amended. We had a public hearing last meeting on January 12, 2015, and the original request was amended to propose rezoning from R15 to the R12 district. So that's the consideration for the board tonight, whether to act on the request to R12.
Okay, the board has seen this before a couple of times in a public hearing. Do we have any questions for either Mr. Bass or the applicant?
I do want to make a clarification statement regarding this. There was a letter that I I think we all received from Ms. Ann Jeremiah. And in the letter, it talked about the fact that R12 would allow duplexes. And she doesn't say exactly that she thinks the number of dwelling units would be doubled by the fact that they would be duplexes, but it does indicate she thinks that there would be a greater number of dwelling units than just single family, and makes reference to increased automobile traffic. And I take it to mean in addition to if it were single family at R12. And last time we talked about this, we agreed and understood that whether it's multifamily or single family, the difference in the number of dwelling units that would be permitted between R15 and R12 is an increase of 7 units.
Yeah, that's how
From 30 units to 37 units. And in fact, those are the absolute maximum, because when the development process occurs, there will be a process of defining what is the usable land and netting out unusable land to thereby reduce the number of dwelling units. So I just wanted to make known for the record that the fact that duplexes are allowed in the zoning does not increase the number of dwelling units. It just changes the style. So whether it's single family or multifamily, it's 37 units at R12, 30 units at R15.
Any other questions, comments from the board?
Mr. Bass, if you could show where the entrance, the new entrance would be to the property and the exit.
Well, this is, through here, there's an existing easement on these two properties, and then it doesn't show up here, but there's another easement to the side.
Okay. The existing easement on those two properties, is that wide enough to accommodate that?
Yeah, I
The
think
new road?
it's once, if I remember right, 150, 160.
And I guess we really wouldn't know until we saw a site plan. If, I don't know whether Mr. Hughes intends to develop this himself or to offer it up to for sale to the developer, but until such time as we saw somebody's site plan, it's hard to say what the traffic pattern would be, although there seems like a fairly obvious solution there.
No, because there are two homes which are quite close over there. There are two homes that are on each side of those entrances. That's what I'm talking about. And from what I'm looking at, it's not large enough to accommodate that.
The one to the east is 50 feet, and the one to the west is 60 feet. And typically, you got a 50-foot right-of-way for a local street.
Those are private easements.
Those are private easements, yes.
Both of those landowners bought those houses with those easements intact.
So did you, Mr. Hughes, did you have any other alternative in reference to an entrance?
No, I've always envisioned Cornwall Street to come down through that property on the east side and come out on the west side on Churchwood. It's a one-shot deal with no cul-de-sacs and all that involved. And it will incorporate both communities. There'll be no, dead ends like we got at Magnolia Trace and places like that. Fire services and rescue require two entrances to a neighborhood.
Right.
So there's two entrances to a neighborhood.
It just seems awfully close to those two homes.
That would be the easement, I guess, regardless of the zoning.
Well, it might be, but if you go down and look at those homes, they're right there on the road.
I think that would be an issue we'd work out in site plan review. So if you don't mind my asking, I mean, you're just asking for rezoning tonight, and obviously we can't require you a site plan.
I'm not gonna have a site plan, I just want to, get it rezoned. Those easements have been there for over 20 years.
Yeah, I understand. So you don't have an immediate plan to develop it
No,
yourself?
the only immediate plan I got is try to pay my taxes on it.
Okay. Understood.
Before you put it in paper.
Yeah, we're all doing that, yes, sir. Okay, so there's not, we shouldn't expect a proposed development or site plan following this?
Not this year.
Not this year, okay. So at this juncture, we're just looking at the rezoning and should not expect a site plan anytime in the near future, it sounds like. Okay. Other questions?
Oh, Mr. Bass, I did have one more. If you could just sort of talk about, as I talked with you earlier, about the differences in terms of the width of the property, in terms of how larger or less, smaller rather,
Well,
the area is going to be.
the number itself refers to the minimum lot size. So 15 means 15,000 square feet. 12, and it's for 12,000 square foot lot size, and 10 for 10,000 square foot lot size. It's interesting for a comparative situation. The Potterstone Village is actually zoned R10, and Chatham Forest is zoned R12.
So you said, excuse me, you said our place was R10?
Potterstone.
Potterstone, okay.
And what is Howland?
Powell Place is MUPD.
But it does allow up to 20 units per acre. So that's 2,000 square feet per lot.
So it has a variety of lot sizes and housing units.
Potterstone has some duplexes in there, doesn't it?
No.
Did they have some townhouses and something?
Potterstone?
Very
Potterstone's just single family home.
That place has several, but I don't remember any Potterstone.
all the way at the end where it connects to the dirt road.
I've never seen them back there.
Never ever seen a home.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Bates.
If there are no other questions, we have two ordinances in front of us. One that would approve the rezoning, one that would deny it, so on. Yes. Public hearing, yeah. So Commissioner Baldwin tells me there's a resident here that wanted to speak, but that
Yes.
yeah, that's really not, the opportunity for a public hearing was at a previous meeting, and that's not part of the proceeding tonight. We're just considering ordinance. So if there are no further questions, does anybody want to offer a motion to adopt either the ordinance to amend the zoning ordinance or the ordinance to deny the request?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to accept this rezoning from R15 to R12.
Been moved and seconded that we adopt an ordinance amending the zoning ordinance of the town of Pittsboro in the matter of the Hughes property. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Second.
None being opposed, the rezoning is approved. Thank you. Next item of business is update from, I believe, Mr. Horn on the Page Vernon Park project.
Hello. This is as much an update and FYI item as anything, really just kind of letting you know that it's, we're prepared to put this out to bid this week, and I'm excited about it. Hope you are too. And I can answer any question you may have.
Paul, could you give us a quick reminder about the project construction budget and how that compares to what your architect's estimating the construction cost to be? Do we think we're going into this expecting a shortfall, or we think we're close?
We've structured the bid in such a way to where a lot of the essential items, well, a lot of the benches, picnic table, what might be considered essential items are actually structured as alternates. So even if we have higher bids than what's been allocated, which is $50,000, then we hope that we'll have enough flexibility in the way that it's structured to be able to complete a project within the money allocated, even if some core elements are left out in this phase. But the estimates have not changed significantly from the last time that you've seen those. So in that respect, the short answer is yes. Overall, we probably expect a shortfall.
Okay.
What people are excited about this park?
I've talked to a number of business owners that are really, the bookstore owner particularly wants to do book signings and events there. I'm sure others will as well.
I would ask that in order to give the board the maximum flexibility, when the item comes back with bids and your recommendation for award and whatnot, we may stand fast on the budget amount and decide that we're not going to give you any more money. But if there are board members that want to advocate for a budget amendment, if there are certain elements that we hate to see taken out, and the extra money is not dramatic, and there are board members who would support increasing your budget to accommodate that, we should at least give the board the opportunity to do that in your presentation.
Absolutely.
In the final analysis, we may say, no, you're not getting any more money, but if it's small amounts and the items are key to the success of the project, we should at least have that option to go to the general fund and
The public fund sponsors the thing.
like I said, in the final analysis, we may decide, no, the budget is what it is, but we should have that choice.
Absolutely, sir. That's encouraging to hear and wise course of action.
I'd like to make one point of clarification, I think.
Okay.
The last item says construction, 29 May.
That would be completion
Thank
of
you.
construction.
Very good. I would not like to start it then. Let's finish it then. Well, I'd like to commend Mr. Horn on his work on the project. He and Rob, the landscape architect, worked really well together, and I think they've come up with a really fantastic plan. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited as well.
Well, thank you, and I would put that back to you for spearheading this and really working with the property owners to donate the land and really shepherd this project. So.
It's a great thing for downtown.
Paul, I have one question, just looking at the sketch. Are these brick pavers that are going between the outside wall and I guess this inside circle where that tree planter is that going to be brick pavers? I'm going by this picture here, not up there.
Yes, sir. These are all, the things, basically, brick pavers.
Okay.
This will be somewhat permeable, so there'll be layers of gravel in
Right. Okay.
throughout the tree roots. We're not going with a very sophisticated system, just a very basic layers of gravel and then the bricks on top of that. So that'll be laid in a different pattern than the rest of it.
Okay. But it is brick pavers all through the back. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, let's see, I think the next item we have is one that the manager provided us an updated version. Just make sure we get our correct version in front of us.
Yes, the version I put in front of you is essentially the same document as before with a few changes in terms of the date and I think maybe the payment schedule.
No, payment schedule is the same as well.
Okay.
The only difference is that the first letter was issued December 11th and had a 45-day commitment, which means it expired yesterday. So we got a new letter dated today with the same terms, the same dollar amount, the same interest rate, and another 45-day commitment for closing. So basically it's the same thing. It's just a new commitment letter with a new term.
Nancy, this is kind of a nitpicky question here, but your amortization table on the back shows the loan being executed on 7 January, and by the time that I think you get this done, it'll be more likely 7 February. Does that mean that they'll entertain bumping the payments out a month as well, or is that not important?
It's just an arbitrary date. When Percy and I were talking with, Chief and I were talking with BB&T, we said that we'd like to make a principal payment in this year.
Okay.
And so that's what it's trying to reflect, is that you see the 3/1 date where we make a principal payment, the level payment of $36,005. So that way we can take, since money was already allocated in this year's budget for that, we wanted to make sure it was spent in this year.
Yeah.
So it will change slightly depending on when we actually close for our loan, but this was just going to let you know what it would look like for by getting a payment in fiscal year 2015 versus the first payment starting in 2016.
Okay, so it really isn't important whether the payment's on 3/1 or 4/1. It's going to be one payment per fiscal year for 4 years.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the current payment amount is budgeted in our the capital outlay. Well, actually specifically the police department's capital outlay for this year, and then depending on how we set it up, presumably we would either set up a separate mechanism or continue to budget within capital outlay a sufficient amount to pay the required scheduled amount. But the loan is for obviously the entire term of 4 years, which would purchase 4 vehicles, and then the installments would be made each year. At the end of the installments, the vehicles would be the town's.
Okay, well, my 2 cents, I think I've already said in a previous meeting, I like this plan because we're getting rid of 4 dilapidated police cars all at once, and we're having to pay for one, spreading the cost out over 4 years. It's a plan that I was familiar with in Chapel Hill, where we ran into issues there with things would come up to be replaced, like a $700,000 fire truck that was a budget buster, and you would keep moving it out, because you could never afford it, and by financing it over time, you flatten your payment stream, and it got to be much more manageable. So I'm hoping that if we can do this, that in future years, I hope we don't try to replace all 4 of these cars in the same year. We find a way to watch their mileages, and then 5, 6 years from now, we spread these out and then mix in other cars and equipment from Public Works as well, so that maybe we can come up with a fleet replacement and heavy equipment replacement plan that's installed loan finance that keeps our annual disbursement for vehicles and equipment sort of flat, so we don't have these big bumps when a $200,000 piece of equipment fails.
And not to complicate things too much, we still have to, the chief and I still have to work out a plan for the actual sunset of the vehicles that we're in effect replacing. I mean, one of the biggest problems that we have right now is that we don't have any cars on the bench to use for either reserves, or if we have, heaven forbid, we have an accident or something like that, and we need it. So it's not, I don't believe our intention to retire all 4 vehicles right out of the box. I think we're looking at retiring probably 2 and keeping 2 others.
Okay.
So a little bit of that's got to be firmed up. And yes, obviously there's a bit of maintenance and upkeep costs with those, but those are bench cars. They're not going to be cars that'll be safe enough to operate, but they're not cars that are going to receive the wear and tear that the new cars are going to be capable of. So, but yeah, I agree totally. Truck-wise over at the utilities, I think John will tell you here in a week or so that truck-wise we're in okay shape. We have to schedule out some replacement there. I think you're probably aware it's the equipment over there that's kind of giving us the biggest problems, and so that's what we're really going to have to.
And those are the ones with the big price tags.
Yeah, that's another headache for another time.
But then when you finance that stuff, you don't have to go for 4 years. You can finance it for 7. As long as it doesn't exceed the life of the equipment. Okay. Well, do other people have questions about this proposal?
Motion to approve resolution approving financing terms for the new police.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries and the vote is approved. Thank you. Let's see, that brings us to, let's see here. Is the chief's memo just FYI on the,
Yeah, I can get to that in
Okay.
a second. But
I guess we'll just grant your capital projects.
Okay. Well, yeah, since you mentioned that, what Chief Crutchfield is looking at is an application for a grant to acquire some video recording equipment, and he's going through diligence with that, and I think that's something that at this point in time, as long as there isn't a commitment required on our part, both in terms of applying for the grant or needing to come up with and provide a formal commitment for any match fees, we're going to take a serious look at the grant application for the video recording equipment, given current events, and I think the need to have that operational capacity within our department. So yeah, the memo is in there just to kind of allow the board to become familiar with what is happening, and we'll have more information on that as we can get it.
Okay, I certainly don't have any objections to what she's proposing here. There is an FYI item, but
yeah, when the rubber hits the road, we will have something in front of you guys.
we got to approve any grants, so yeah, we'll see.
Did you tell us that the deadline is the 31st?
I'm sorry?
I don't know if you mentioned that the deadline is January 31st for the grant.
Okay.
For the application, yeah. So I assume y'all are working on that.
Yeah, Kristen and I are working on it together.
One thing that comes to mind on this is, do we have a policy in place for the video data storage and dissemination? And if not,
The grant requires it, and so that's one of the things that Percy's in the process of drafting.
right, okay.
Okay, just a couple of, I'll try to be as quick as I can and get to Ms. Hemsley's financial update. The Downtown Vision Plan is currently in a process with Kinley Horn in terms of developing their work plan and scope of services, which will be reviewed by NCDOT. That's probably over a 2-month time frame. Following that, Kinley Horn will begin design and survey work, which would also require DOT review and approval. Complicating that would be, in inserting that into the time, another insertion into the timeline would be whatever utility right-of-way issues and other things that the survey would pop up. And so those would be managed as well. So that process right there would be, we're probably looking at 9 or 10 months to complete that. DOT has indicated, though, that once we do have all that information compiled and we do have firm design work and do have something ready for prime time, that DOT has indicated that at least at this point in time they're not willing to cover any costs of actually getting feedback or revisiting the vision plan with the public. So I think that's an issue that between Kinley Horn and some other stakeholders that I think I need to iron out a little bit, because I think that was key. I think the whole visioning process really, the key to it, the success of it, in my opinion, was the fact that we had heavy involvement from the downtown stakeholders in that. And so that's going to be an important piece, and we'll have more on that. Make sure that we're engaging everyone that can possibly be engaged with that. As you're aware, we have mid-year, or not mid-year retreat, excuse me, we have the early year retreat scheduled for February 2nd. It's a week from today at 8:30 until essentially you want to attend. We're thinking around 4:30. Attached to what I put in front of you was a preliminary draft menu. Did I say menu? Sorry, I must be hungry. That's an agenda, I think most people would call it. In the middle part of it, if you go down, some of it's going to look familiar. But what I want to talk about first is the focus topics. After lunch, what we'd like to do is maybe key in on some areas that you guys would like to spend. You guys want to make sure, absolute sure that you can get covered. I know the mayor mentioned water and sewer, utility rates. If there are anything else, and I'm just purely by example, facility issues or anything like that you want to cover. What I would like you to do, if I give you guys a homework assignment, is have you guys fill in and some topics on your own and forward those to me, and we can make sure that we schedule some time for those to be discussed during that general time frame. If we have a lot, we'll spend a little bit less on each. If we don't have much, we can spend more on just a few. But I think we want to make sure that everyone at least has a chance to cover an area that they want to bring to the table. I can certainly give you guys feedback in advance of the meeting on what we've come up with to that point, and if you have any further input on that, then that'd be great. But in speaking with Mr. Long, I think that he's really excited to come back. Obviously, we work pretty well with him. The format would otherwise be the same. I'd try to go through just sort of a state of the town, probably not focusing as much on some of the financial stuff as maybe has been done in the past, but talk a little bit more in terms of some of the organizational things that I'm thinking about, but nothing earth-shattering there. And then we would get into department head reports with going over sort of similar to what we had done last year with past accomplishments and where they would propose heading over the course of the next year or so. And then having more department head discussion, probably allowing enough time with all of that for you guys to answer questions. We have a relatively healthy, non-greasy lunch planned for you guys at 12:15. And we can ease into those focus topics like we had talked about before, and then look to bring things to a close in the afternoon. And really coming to the conclusion of what are the things that we want the town to work on over the course of the next year, but also a couple of years after that. So if you guys have any input or any feedback on I don't want to say menu again, but the agenda, please let me know, and please do get back to me with some focus topics that you guys want to flesh out with a little bit more detail a week from today. Then lastly, one thing that I would mention is that another piece I think that's going to require a bit of discussion would be sort of the next phase of our Chatham Park discussions, and that being how we're providing, I guess, the extra service to proposed new development. And town staff has had some meetings with the engineering representing Chatham Park. I've had some conversations with staff from Preston Development as well as Mr. Smith, and they have a couple of options that they've thrown out there in terms of how to get a couple of pieces constructed. Now, that said, the next conversation I had upon those meetings was to have a little bit more conversation with the School of Government, and specifically the Environmental Finance Department that you had. David was here tonight, but sitting behind him was former Chatham County engineer Jeff Hughes, who also works in environmental finance and is a great resource. And I've had the pleasure of picking his brain on some of the options that some of the ideas that Preston has thrown out there. And what I'd like to do in the last meeting of February is to bring Mr. Hughes and possibly Ms. Norma Houston from the Environmental Finance Department in and have them discuss. First of all, we go over some of the things that are being talked about at this point, but then have Mr. Hughes and Ms. Houston discuss some of the pros and cons of both, as well as some best case management practices that have been done in other North Carolina communities, and kind of provide us the legal framework of what we're dealing with here. Because Preston's couple the things that are being talked about, they are open to a number of alternatives here. But I think the bottom line is as always, and just like we talked about with Pittsboro Place, my responsibility is to make sure that Pittsboro is set up over the long term with all of these. And so I think that's something the school government is in a really good and neutral position to help us out and engage in that next phase of discussion. I know I've had some conversation on this approach with Mr. Culpepper as well, and I think they can certainly be present on that evening and participate as much as you guys need them to, as far as any of the things that we've talked about. But I think it is time that we start really kind of, like I said, engaging on this next level of technical and legal frameworks for how we're going to provide some of these utilities moving forward in the future. Now, granted, on a side track, we also, as you're aware, we also have a process ongoing now to gather input from consultants on our existing wastewater plant, and that is continuing as well. I think on Thursday, they're going to be staff will be interviewing applicants, the two applicants for that. We've got a third in reserve. So insofar as we're looking at our existing plant, we'll be starting that process of making that critical review. But I think for now, in order to get us moving forward and off center on this other piece, I'd like to bring in this other help and get that conversation started as well. So we'll get this material out to you in advance, unless there aren't any objections to that. Then I think we'd like to move forward in the second meeting in February, start that conversation. With that, my mouth is completely dry, so I would tap out if you guys have any questions for me. Have at it.
No, I congratulate the manager and appreciate your reaching out to the university. Mr. Hughes and his staff are a great resource. And again, thank Nancy for the work that she's done on helping us understand better our water and sewer rate structure. I think having that resource so close to us, we'd be foolish not to use their expertise, and I'm very happy to see that they're reaching out to Jeff and his staff, so thank you for that. Let's see, any other questions from Larry before we move to the financial report? Nancy, you want to give us a quick rundown on
Sure.
our finances?
I'll be referring to the financial summary that was in your packet. Alrighty.
It's running out of gas.
Oh dear. Well, I'll be very brief then. If you can go to the financial summary, which is the one-page report, please. So this is a different document. This is the detail. So it's the one-page summary. Yes, that one. Thank you. Okay. So this is our financial summary report for the period of July 1st through December 31st. At this point, we're in our 6th month, which is basically 50% of what we would have for our budget or our projection. Looking quickly at the general fund side of the sheet on the left side, overall revenue is slightly above budget at the 51.93%, and revenue is exceeding expenditures by almost $183,000, because you can see that our expenditures is about 47.02%. Property taxes continue to come in. I suspect that when we get our report from Chatham County for the month of December, it's going to be our all-time high, since they were due by January 6th in order to avoid any penalty. And so I expect a big increase in our property taxes for next month. So basically we're in good shape with revenues exceeding expenditures. The details were provided to you in the encumbrance and expenditure report, which is that separate report that's about 30 or so pages long. And as always, I'll continue to monitor departmental budgets as we go through the fiscal year. Moving over to the enterprise fund on the right side of the water and sewer, we're actually exceeding revenues, also exceeding expenditures here. We're at 39, almost 40% of revenue received, which, even though we're behind, and when you think about it, we should be at 50% of our revenue. However, we still are exceeding our expenditures by about 2% with what we've had for expenses for the month of through the month of December. We did have some debt service for the month of December. We actually had to pay BB&T a semi-annual installment payment of about $26,000, and this was for the Creel Street sewer rehab project. Now, this number is not reflected in the expenditures under debt service. When I had printed this, I had not reconciled our bank account yet, and I had recently set this particular loan to go to automatic payment. So rather than have to pay it by check, I wanted it to have it draft out our account. So I ran this report before I had put the payment into our general ledger. So it's roughly, instead of the debt service being actual to date in the 46, it's closer to about 70,000 that we've had so far in our debt service. So you'll see that corrected in the month of January, but so I just wanted you to be aware of that. On the capital reserve enterprise fund, we continue to receive water and sewer access charges, and that's primarily from Powell Place, their Phase 2D project. And we are certainly over our projections by a considerable margin, and it's due to the impact fees that we've received for that fund. And then just as a quick recap on just other things that have been happening in finance, as you know, I've been working with the police chief regarding vehicle financing for BB&T, and we expect to close on that probably in the month of February. And also been working with the chief with the grant application with the Governor's Crime Commission for the vehicle recording equipment, the video recording equipment. And also, I've been
as part of the process of the water and sewer analysis, I've been researching online credit card payments and being able to do online payments through our website. And so I'd like to move forward on that project and to actually start working with a vendor to implement this service. We've been getting more and more people, more of our customers are asking us, when are we going to be able to pay online? When am I going to be able to pay by credit card? So I would like to start up to offer that as a service for us, so that is something that hopefully we can implement within 30 to 60 days max, and we'll be able to have that payment option available to our customers. That's what I have for you this evening. Any questions?
Any questions? Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, a couple of quick mayoral updates. Just a reminder, everybody, we have the joint elected officials meeting sponsored by the EDC this Thursday at the Best Foods Cafeteria. The actual meeting starts at 7. You're invited to come at 6 if you want to take advantage of the opportunity to eat there at Best Foods. Also shared with you that the EDC has finished its process of filling its empty board seat vacancies and got that approved by the county commissioners. And I apologize, I didn't bring the list of all the people who were appointed, but the one that sticks out in my mind is Greg Lewis from the Roadhouse, who's been a real mover and shaker in the downtown business community. So I think that was a good appointment. I look forward to working with Greg. Taylor Hobbs, yeah, he was on that list. Yeah, so I think we got some new good high energy faces there, and I think it was a good process. One last thing from me, I'm going to go to a birthday party on Wednesday, and I've written a proclamation that I'll share with you all online tomorrow. But we have a citizen in town who's turning 104, who's a resident at one of our local continuing care facilities, Anne Marie Edwin. Was born in Philadelphia on January 20th, 1911, and she'll be 104 on Wednesday. So I've agreed to go and read a short proclamation proclaiming a day of celebration of the 104th birthday of Anne Marie Edwin in the town of Pittsburgh. So I'll be doing that on Wednesday at noon. And it's at Cambridge Hills, if anybody wants to come.
You got to see her recently?
I did not know.
Okay.
She was.
Anyway, would you take a photograph and put it on the...
Sure, I'll get somebody, if I can't take it myself, I'll get somebody to photograph it. Wednesday at noon, they're planning a little celebration for us, so I'm pretty good with it. Okay, and that's all updates I have. Anything for RPO? Solid waste? No? Fairgrounds?
No, nothing.
Okay. And Downtown Business Association?
I attended the last meeting, and more members are showing up every meeting I go, so it's still gaining momentum. And I told them that during the retreat we would probably have a discussion about the Christmas parade. And I said, do you guys really want to have your words heard? Write something down as for your rationale for changing the Christmas parade, and it'll be discussed. So.
When's the next meeting? I never did that in my head. Wednesday.
First Wednesday. No, it's the second Wednesday. Usually at Greg's place.
Okay. Commissioner concerns, Mr. Farrell.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Foley?
I just have one thing. I got this blue card in the mail, Mr. Bisbeck, and I just wondered if the Caroline Dialysis could actually receive a phone call about this if they didn't get the card.
I'm sorry. I don't know.
Okay, there was a card that I received in my mailbox that said that water, there's going to be a change in the water process for a month, the addition of ammonia for 1 month period, suspend the addition of it, and it will impact kidney dialysis patients. And a lot of patients probably don't even look at mail and stuff. I just want to make sure the clinic here in town is aware of it so that they can let,
Okay.
and I can imagine at the clinic, they have enough filtration that won't impact the clinic itself. But just to make sure that all the patients know from their home use that.
Yeah, I knew that notice went out. I didn't, yeah, we'll make sure that dialysis and any other medical facilities, I'll follow up and see who exactly, maybe the question is just, who, if we can get a better idea of who isn't, as strange as it sounds, who isn't receiving it. So I'll work with Mr. Portillo.
Just a phone call, just if it's that important, it specifically says kidney dialysis patients, just to make certain that people know about that.
Yeah, I think I think the issue is at this point in time, they sort of charge the water with more chlorine than they typically would, and so that could affect dialysis.
And now I'll ask my husband because he makes the water, but I think he can say that.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this, but I think the issue is actually at the treatment facility where I think they have to dechlorine, they have to have very, very pure water for that process, and they need to know how we're treated. So I don't know that the patients at home have an issue as much as they while they're getting their treatment. But again, I'm not an expert on this.
Well, because their bodies can't process anything, it might impact them. I'll talk to John about it, but I just want to make sure that they're.
Okay. Anything else?
No, that's it.
Mr. Fielder?
Well, I did have this item because I did find it really helpful for me to have a written document of the manager's updates. It was not in my packet, so I was really happy to see it when I got here tonight. So thank you.
There's a different format that I want to do for that, and I want to talk a little bit more about it next week, but I want to get your opinion on it before, because I want to put it out there for everyone, and I know that gets out on the website, but there's a lot of other people that have a hand in those updates than me just, by brute force making those phone calls every week and saying, hey, can I put this in the update? And there's an app that I've been using for note taking that allows for collaborative Evernote. And so I want to steer us towards that, and so I've been converting over the last few weeks, converting a lot of those issues over to Evernote, and then I've kind of been easing staff into using these collaborative documents so that we can all edit things at once and just sort of chat about it off to the side. So yeah, because I don't, it's to me it's not a very efficient for everyone's use of time, I think, to just sort of recreate these things every week, and I'd like to put something out there that allows not only you guys to access it, but the general public as well, and that would be as simple as after everyone's provided their input in real time over the course of, as we go along, that I'm able to just simply print those things, print out the relevant updates, and then simply put those in the packets. You have everything there on the cloud for everyone to look at. So go ahead and throw something at me if I'm overthinking it, but that's been the reason why that's kind of been uneven lately, is I hate those written updates that I've been doing for 20 years, and I want to do something different. So, anyway, my apologies for it being uneven, but you'll get a more even, improved process here if I can pull this off.
The other thing I wanted to mention, two other things, is there was and is an issue with the Potterstone sidewalks in the neighborhood wanting resolution on maintenance on the sidewalks, and I'd like to bring it to a resolution one way or the other, either way. So if we can try to bring that up.
Yeah, that's going to have to be a town-wide sidewalk policy that may not be popular.
I don't even know the request. I mean, do they actually have a request in? I mean,
They wrote a letter a while back saying, please take over our sidewalk.
Yeah.
And I don't, in some cases it's a question of, and Mr. Messick has even more history on this than I do, in some cases it's a question of, I think, whether we actually, and I know this is the case, for instance, even in Powell Place, because this is where the other mole is going to pop up as soon as I smack this one. is that, do we actually have legal title, I guess, is it in our right of way in some of these areas, and that's not, I'm not entirely sure about that. And then after we resolve that, then it becomes an issue of how to actually go about maintaining the sidewalk. And we're going to need some definition on that. And we are not currently staffed or budgeted to maintain the sidewalks in the town of Pittsboro unless we get a grant, a CMAQ grant to build a new one, or unless we do something to help share the costs with residents or take them on ourselves. And so it's a lot more complicated than this letter from Potterstone just saying, that is simply requesting that we take over their.
Yeah, and I think it's based partially in what they feel as though was agreed between the town and the developer at the time development was approved, and what the developer then promised to the residents and induced them to, or help them purchase properties with this expectation. So, I don't know the deal, but I'd like to force to get resolution on it, at least work on it, because I get phone calls and, I'd like to.
Well, if I can add my 2 cents, this keeps coming up because they just don't like the answer over there. And I remember.
I don't know if I've given them an answer.
Oh, well, I did a walkthrough over there with Jim Nass years ago when I was the manager, and broke out the maps and looked at them. John, part of the problem is those sidewalks are just not in the right of way. Because of the open ditches, they're set back and they're on private property. And then Brian is right there. In some places out of Powell Place, we have most of those sidewalks are in the road right of way, except for where they wander off through these pocket parks, and then they become the responsibility of the HOA. So there's some are and some aren't. And
which are the ones that are in the worst shape.
Yeah, and so I think it keeps coming up at Potterstone because they just don't like the answer. That when you all built these, you put the sidewalks outside of the town's right of way. We don't have any authority to come into your yard and start jackhammering out sidewalks and fixing them. So it's.
So we pick it up. I mean, and you've mentioned it in the past, and so we'll pick that issue up and we'll start talking about it internally, and then it becomes more complicated. And then,
Well, see, that's news to me, because the way it's been portrayed to me is that the sidewalks are actually in the right of way.
Like the ditch and something.
So,
Well, because it's a ditch and not just a narrow, it forces them back part of it.
yeah.
I guess we want to encourage developers to do the ditches, right? It's supposed to be better for.
We say it's better for
Right.
the environment.
Yeah, so I agree. Let's.
Yeah, it's right. It is going to be complicated, and it does need to be worked on. And I pledge my full faith and credit. But yeah, I mean, Potterstone was approved at a time when the town was a lot more amenable to ditches as opposed to underground storm drainage, which I'm not arguing for or against. That's just the way it was. And when you do that, you have to if you want a sidewalk, you have to put it somewhere. And there's only so much right of way that you can take. You have to put it side by side. Whereas in a more, for lack of a better way, put a more modern development, you would put the sidewalk right on top of the underground storm drainage.
Well, that works with the curb and gutter section, but with the ditch, and that is more environmentally friendly.
Yeah, I'm not.
That you put it on the backside because that makes sense. And quite frankly, if that's the way you go, you get more right of way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just don't know that was what was done all the way across the board in that case.
Yeah, no, and so I'm just trying to push it along and let's get resolution. And I agree policy would be important to develop.
Thank you. Mr. Gold.
No, nothing particularly. I just have Triangle J on Wednesday, and of course I'm past chair now. But anyway, so basically that I will be going to that Wednesday. If there's anything you want to discuss regionally, just bring it to my attention. I will bring it up in that meeting.
Okay, thank you. Mr.
The Short Lake Partnership was in the news this week.
I did. Very interesting.
Commissioner Turner.
I don't have anything, thank you.
Okay. no further business, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.